There was left behind by this king a writer of pure Phrygia's blood, born in the new harbour of Athens, who wrote for us what follows about Athens. From which may be seen how truly the mother Helice spoke when she said that the customs of Phrygia could never take firm hold in Athens. From the other Greeks you will have heard a great deal of bad about Cecrops, because he was not in good repute, but I dare affirm that he was an enlightened man. Very renowned both among the inhabitants and among us, for he was against oppression, unlike the other priests, and was virtuous, and knew how to value the wisdom of distant nations. Knowing that, he permitted us to live according to our own Audiobook. There was a story current that he was favorable to us because he was the son of a Frisian girl and an Egyptian priest. The reason of this was that he had blue eyes, and that many of our girls had been stolen and sold to Egypt. But he never confirmed this. However it may have been, certain it is that he showed us more friendship than all the other priests together. When he died, his successors soon began to tear up our charters, and gradually to enact so many unsuitable statutes that at long last nothing remained of liberty but the shadow and the name. Besides, they would not allow the laws to be written, so that the knowledge of them was hidden from us. Formerly all the cases in Athens were pleaded in our language, but afterwards in both languages, and at last in the native language only. At first the men of Athens only married women of our own race, but the young men as they grew up with the girls of the country took them to wife. The bastard children of this connection were the handsomest and cleverest in the world. But they were likewise the wickedest, wavering between the two parties, paying no regard to laws or customs except where they suited their own interests. As long as a ray of Phrygia's spirit existed, all the building materials were for common use, and no one might build a house larger or better than his neighbors. But when some degenerate townspeople got rich by sea voyages and by the silver that their slaves got in the silver countries, they went to live out on the hills or in the valleys. There, behind high enclosures of trees or walls, they built palaces with costly furniture, and in order to remain in good odor with the nasty priests, they placed their likenesses of false gods and unchaste statues. Sometimes the dirty priests and princes wished for the boys rather than the girls, and often led them astray from the paths of virtue by rich presents or by force. Because riches were more valued by this lost and degenerate race than virtue or honor, one sometimes saw boys dressed in splendid flowing robes, to the disgrace of their parents and maidens, and to the shame of their own sex. If our simple parents came to a general assembly at Athens and made complaints, a cry was raised, "Here, here! There is a sea monster going to speak." Such is Athens become, like a morass in a tropical country full of leeches, toads, and poisonous snakes, in which no man of decent habits can set his foot. This is inscribed in all our citadels. How our Denmark was lost to us 1602 years after the submersion of Atlant. Through the mad wantonness of Woden, Maggie had become master of the east part of Scandinavia. They dare not come over the hills and over the sea. The mother would not prevent it. She said, "I see no danger in their weapons, but much in taking the Scandinavians back again, because they are so degenerate and spoilt." The General Assembly were of the same opinion. Therefore it was left to him. A good 100 years ago Denmark began to trade. They gave their iron weapons in exchange for gold ornaments, as well as for copper and iron ore. The mother sent messengers to advise them to have nothing to do with this trade. There was danger to their morals in it, and if they lost their morals they would soon lose their liberty. But the Denmarkers paid no attention to her. They did not believe that they could lose their morals, therefore they would not listen to her. At last they were at a loss themselves for weapons and necessaries, and this difficulty was their punishment. Their bodies were brilliantly adorned, but their cupboards and their sheds were empty. Just 100 years after the first ship with provisions sailed from the coast, poverty and want made their appearance, hunger spread her wings all over the country, dissension marched proudly about the streets and into the houses. Charity found no place, and unity departed. The child asked its mother for food, she had no food to give, only jewels. The women applied to their husbands, the husbands appealed to the counts had nothing to give, or if they had, they hid it away. Now the jewels must be sold, but while the sailors were away for that purpose, the frost came and laid a plank upon the sea and the strait, the Sound. When the frost had made the bridge, vigilance ceased in the land, and treachery took its place. Instead of watching on the shores, they put their horses in their sledges and drove off to Scandinavia. Then the Scandinavians, who hungered after the land of their forefathers, came to Denmark. One bright night they all came. Now, they said, we have a right to the land of our fathers, and while they were fighting about it, the Finns came to the defenseless villages and ran away with the children. As they had no good weapons, they lost the battle, and with it their freedom, and Maggie became master. All this was the consequence of their not reading Freya's texts, and neglecting her counsels. There are some who think that they were betrayed by the counts, and that the maidens had long suspected it, but if any one attempted to speak about it, his mouth was shut by golden chains. We can express no opinion about it, we can only say to you, do not trust too much to the wisdom of your princes or of your maidens, but if you wish to keep things straight, everybody must watch over his own passions, as well as the general welfare. 2 years afterwards Maggie himself came with a fleet of light boats to steal the lamp from the mother of Texland. This wicked deed he accomplished one stormy winter night, while the wind roared and the hail rattled against the windows. The watchman on the tower, hearing the noise, lighted his torch. As soon as the light from the tower fell upon the bastion, he saw that already armed men had got over the wall. He immediately gave the alarm, but it was too late. Before the guard was ready, there were 2,000 people battering the gate. The struggle did not last long. As the guard had not kept a good watch, they were overwhelmed. While the fight was going on, a rascally Finn stole into the chamber of the mother, and would have done her violence. She resisted him, and threw him down against the wall. When he got up, he ran his sword through her. If you will not have me, you shall have my sword. A Danish soldier came behind him and clave his head in two. There came from it a stream of black blood and a wreath of blue flame. The Maggie had the mother nursed on his own ship. As soon as she was well enough to speak clearly, the Maggie told her that she must sail with him, but that she should keep her lamp and her maidens, and should hold a station higher than she had ever done before. Moreover, he said that he should ask her, in presence of all his chief men, if he would become the ruler of all the country and people of Freya, that she must declare and affirm this, or he would let her die a painful death. Then, when he had gathered all his chiefs around her bed, he asked, in a loud voice, Frana, since you are a prophetess, shall I become ruler over all the lands and people of Freya? Frana did as if she took no notice of him. But at last she opened her lips, and said, my eyes are dim, but the other light dawns upon my soul. Yes, I see it. Hear, Eartha, and rejoice with me. At the time of the submersion of Atland, the first spoke of the jewel stood at the top. After that it went down, and our freedom with it. When 2 spokes, or 2,000 years, shall have rolled down, the sons shall arise who have been bred of the fornication of the princes and priests with the people, and shall witness against their fathers. They shall all fall by murder, but what they have proclaimed shall endure, and shall bear fruit in the bosoms of able men, like good seed which is laid in thy lap. Yet 1,000 years shall the spoke descend, and sink deeper in darkness, and in the blood shed over you by the wickedness of the princes and priests. After that, the dawn shall begin to glow. When they perceive this, the false princes and priests will strive and wrestle against freedom, but freedom, love, and unity will take the people under their protection, and rise out of the vile pool. The light which at first only glimmered shall gradually become a flame. The blood of the bad shall flow over your surface, but you must not absorb it. At last the poisoned animals shall eat it, and die of it. All the stories that have been written in praise of the princes and priests shall be committed to the flames. Thenceforth your children shall live in peace. When she had finished speaking she sank down. The Maggie, who had not understood her, shrieked out, I have asked you if I should become master of all the lands and people of Freya, and now you have been speaking to another. Frana raised herself up, stared at him, and said, before 7 days have passed your soul shall haunt the tombs with the night birds, and your body shall be at the bottom of the sea. Very good, said the Maggie, swelling with rage. Say that I am coming. Then he said to his executioners, throw this woman overboard. This was the end of the last of the mothers. We do not ask for revenge. Time will provide that, but 1,000 times we will call with Freya, watch. 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 How it fared afterwards with the Maggie. After the murder of the mother, he brought the lamp and the maidens into his own ship, together with all the booty that he chose. Afterwards he went up the Flymere because he wished to take the maiden of Mediasplik or Stavern and install her as mother, but there they were on their guard. The seafaring men of Stavern and Eldurga would gladly have gone to John, but the great fleet was out on a distant voyage, so they proceeded in their small fleet to Mediasplik, and kept themselves concealed in a sheltered place behind trees. The Maggie approached Mediasplik in broad daylight, nevertheless, his men boldly stormed the citadel. But as they landed from the boats, our people sallied forth from the creek, and shot their arrows with balls of burning turpentine upon the fleet. They were so well aimed that many of the ships were instantly on fire. Those left to guard the ships shot at us, but they could not reach us. When at last a burning ship drifted towards the ship of the Maggie, he ordered the man at the helm to sheer off, but this man was the Dane who had cleft the head of the fin. He said, "You sent our Iramutter to the bottom of the sea to say that you were coming. In the bustle of the fight you might forget it, now I will take care that you keep your word." The Maggie tried to push him off, but the sailor, a real Frisian and strong as an ox, clutched his head with both hands, and pitched him into the surging billows. Then he hoisted up his brown shield, and sailed straight to our fleet. Thus the maidens came unhurt to us, but the lamp was extinguished, and no one knew how that had happened. When those on the uninjured ships heard that the Maggie was drowned, they sailed away, because their crews were Danes. When the fleet was far enough off, our sailors turned and shot their burning arrows at the Finns. When the Finns saw that, and found that they were betrayed, they fell into confusion, and lost all discipline and order. At this moment the garrison sallied forth from the citadel. Those who resisted were killed, and those who fled found their death in the marshes of the Kreilinger wood. Postscript. When the sailors were in the creek, there was a wag from Stavern among them, who said, "Medea may well laugh if we rescue her from her citadel." Upon this, the maidens gave to the creek the name Medea Mylakia, Lake of Medea. The occurrences that happened after this everybody can remember. The maidens ought to relate it in their own way, and have it well inscribed. We consider that our task is fulfilled. Hail! The end of the book. The writings of Adelbrast and Apollonia. My name is Adelbrast, the son of Apol and Adela. I was elected by my people as Grevetman over the Lindorden. Therefore I will continue this book in the same way as my mother has spoken it. After the Maggie was killed and Friesberg was restored, a mother had to be chosen. The mother had not named her successor, and her will was nowhere to be found. 7 months later a general assembly was called at Groningen, because it was on the boundary of Saxamarken. My mother was chosen, but she would not be the mother. She had saved my father's life, in consequence of which they had fallen in love with each other, and she wished to marry. Many people wished my mother to alter her decision, but she said an Iramutter ought to be as pure in her conscience as she appears outwardly, and to have the same love for all her children. Now, as I love Apol better than anything else in the world, I cannot be such a mother. Thus spoke and reasoned Adela, but all the other maidens wished to be the mother. Each state was in favor of its own maiden, and would not yield. Therefore none was chosen, and the kingdom was without any restraint. From what follows you will understand Luchert, the king who had lately died, had been chosen in the lifetime of the mother, and seemingly with the love and confidence of all the states. It was his turn to live at the great court of Bilkum, and in the lifetime of the mother great honor was done to him there, as there were more messengers and knights there than had ever been seen there before. But now he was lonely and forsaken, because every one was afraid that he would set himself above the law, and rule them like the slave kings. Every headman imagined that he did enough if he looked after his own state, and did not care for the others. With the Burgmagden it was still worse. Each of them depended upon her own judgment, and whenever a Grevetman did anything without her, she raised distrust between him and his people. If any case happened which concerned several states, and one maid had been consulted, the rest all exclaimed that she had spoken only in the interest of her own state. By such proceedings they brought disputes among the states, and so severed the bond of union that the people of one state were jealous of those of the rest, or at least considered them as strangers. The consequence of which was that the Gauls or Truanden, Druids, took possession of our lands as far as the Skelt, and the Magi as far as the Wessera. How this happened my mother has explained, otherwise this book would not have been written, although I have lost all hope that it would be of any use. I do not write in the hope that I shall win back the land or preserve it, in my opinion that is impossible. I write only for the future generations, that they may all know in what way we were lost, and that each may learn that every crime brings its punishment. My name is Apollonia. 2 and 30 days after my mother's death my brother Adelbrast was found murdered on the wharf, his skull fractured and his limbs torn asunder. My father, who lay ill, died of fright. Then my younger brother, Apol, sailed from here to the west side of Skunland. There he built a citadel named Lindisberg, in order there to avenge our wrong. Alda accorded him many years for that. He had 5 sons, who all caused fear to Maggie, and brought fame to my brother. After the death of my mother and my brother, all the bravest of the land joined together and made a covenant, called the Adelbond. In order to preserve us from injury, they brought me and my youngest brother, Adelherd, to the burg, me to the maidens, and him to the warriors. When I was 30 years old I was chosen as Bergmagd, and my brother at 50 was chosen Grevitman. From mother's side my brother was the 6th, but from father's side the 3rd. By right, therefore, his descendants could not put over Alinda after their names, but they all wished to do it in honor of their mother. In addition to this, there was given to us also a copy of the Book of Adela's Followers. That gave me the most pleasure, because it came into the world by my mother's wisdom. In the Burg I have found other writings also in praise of my mother. All this I will write afterwards. These are the writings left by Bruno, who was the writer of this Burg. After the followers of Adela had made copies, each in his kingdom, of what was inscribed upon the walls of the Burg, they resolved to choose a mother. For this purpose a general assembly was called at this farm. By the first advice of Adela, Tunja was recommended. That would have been arranged, only that my Bergmagd asked to speak. She had always supposed that she would be chosen mother, because she was at the Burg from which mothers had generally been chosen. When she was allowed to speak, she opened her false lips and said, "You all seem to place great value on Adela's advice, but that shall not shut my mouth. Who is Adela, and whence comes it that you respect her so highly? She was what I am now, a Bergmagd of this place. Is she, then, wiser and better than I and all the others? Or is she more conversant with our laws and customs? If that had been the case, she would have become mother when she was chosen. But instead of that, she preferred matrimony to a single life, watching over herself and her people. She is certainly very clear-sighted, but my eyes are far from being dim. I have observed that she is very much attached to her husband, which is very praiseworthy, but I see, likewise, that Tunja is Apol's niece. Further I say nothing. The principal people understood very well which way the wind blew with her. But among the people there arose disputes, and as most of the people came from here, they would not give the honor to Tunja. The conferences were ended, knives were drawn, and no mother was chosen. Shortly afterwards one of our messengers killed his comrade. As he had been a man of good character hitherto, my Bergmagd had permission to help him over the frontier. But instead of helping him over to Twiskland, Germany, she fled with him herself to Oera, and then to the Maggie. The Maggie, who wished to please his sons of Freya, appointed her mother of Gothenburg, in Skunland. But she wished for more, and she told him that if he could get Adela out of the way he might become master of the whole of Freya's land. She said she hated Adela for having prevented her from being chosen mother. If he would promise her Texland, her messenger should serve as guide to his warriors. All this was confessed by her messenger. The second writing. 15 months after the last General Assembly, at the festival of the harvest month, everybody gave himself up to pleasure and merrymaking, and no one thought of anything but diversion. But Alda wished to teach us that watchfulness should never be relaxed. In the midst of the festivities the fog came and enveloped every place in darkness. Cheerfulness melted away, but watchfulness did not take its place. The Coast Guard deserted their beacons, and no one was to be seen on any of the paths. When the fog rose, the sun scarcely appeared among the clouds. But the people all came out shouting with joy, and the young folks went about singing to their bagpipes, filling the air with their melody. But while everyone was intoxicated with pleasure, treachery had landed with its horses and riders. As usual, darkness had favored the wicked, and they had slipped in through the paths of Linda's wood. Before Adela's door 12 girls led 12 lambs, and 12 boys led 12 calves. A young Saxon best rode a wild bull which he had caught and tamed. They were decked with all kinds of flowers, and the girls' dresses were fringed with gold from the Rhine. When Adela came out of her house, a shower of flowers fell on her head. They all cheered loudly, and the fifes of the boys were heard over everything. Poor Adela. Poor people. How short will be your joy. When the procession was out of sight, a troop of Magyar soldiers rushed up to Adela's house. Her father and her husband were sitting on the steps. The door was open, and within stood Adelbrast her son. When he saw the danger of his parents, he took his bow from the wall and shot the leader of the pirates, who staggered and fell on the grass. The second and third met a similar fate. In the meantime his parents had seized their weapons, and went slowly to John's house. They would soon have been taken, but Adela came. She had learned in the burg to use all kinds of weapons. She was 7 feet high, and her sword was the same length. She waved it 3 times over her head, and each time a knight bit the earth. Reinforcements came, and the pirates were made prisoners, but too late, an arrow had penetrated her bosom. The treacherous Maggie had poisoned it, and she died of it. The elegy of the Bergmagd. Yes, departed friend, thousands are arrived, and more are coming. They wished to hear the wisdom of Adela. Truly, she was a princess, for she had always been the leader. Oh sorrow, what good can you do? Her garments of linen and wool she spun and wove herself. How could she add to her beauty? Not with pearls, for her teeth were more white. Not with gold, for her tresses were more brilliant, not with precious stones, for her eyes, though soft as those of a lamb, were so lustrous that you could scarcely look into them. But why do I talk of beauty? Freya was certainly not more beautiful. Yes, my friends, Freya, who possessed 7 perfections, of which each of her daughters inherited 1, or at most 3. But even if she had been ugly, she would still have been dear to us. Is she warlike? Listen, my friend. Adela was the only daughter of our Grevitman. She stood 7 feet high. Her wisdom exceeded her stature, and her courage was equal to both together. Here is an instance. There was once a turf ground on fire. 3 children got upon yonder gravestone. There was a furious wind. The people were all shouting, and the mother was helpless. Then came Adela. What are you all standing still here for? She cried. Try to help them, and W.R. Alda will give you strength. Then she ran to the cryalwood and got some elder branches, of which she made a bridge. The others then came to assist her, and the children were saved. The children bring flowers to the place every year. There came once 3 Phoenician sailors, who began to ill-treat the children, when Adela, having heard their screams, beat the scoundrels till they were insensible, and then, to prove to them what miserable wretches they were, she tied them all 3 to a spindle. The foreign lords came to look after their people, and when they saw how ridiculously they had been treated they were very angry, till they were told what had happened. Upon that they bowed themselves before Adela, and kissed the hem of her garment. But come, distant living friend. The birds of the forest fled before the numerous visitors. Come, friend, and you shall hear her wisdom. By the gravestone of which mention has already been made her body is buried. Upon the stone the following words are inscribed. Tread softly, for here lies Adela. The old legend which is written on the outside wall of the city tower is not written in the book of Adela's followers. Why this has been neglected I do not know, but this book is my own, so I will put it in out of regard to my relations. The oldest doctrine. Hail to all the well-intentioned children of Freya. Through them the earth shall become holy. Learn and announce to the people W.R. Alda is the ancient of ancients, for he created all things. W.R. Alda is all in all, for he is eternal and everlasting. W.R. Alda is omnipresent but invisible, and therefore is called a spirit. All that we can see of him are the created beings who come to life through him and go again, because from W.R. Alda all things proceed and return to him. W.R. Alda is the beginning and the end. W.R. Alda is the only almighty being, because from him all other strength comes, and returns to him. Therefore he alone is the creator, and nothing exists without him. W.R. Alda established eternal principles, upon which the laws of creation were founded, and no good laws could stand on any other foundation. But although everything is derived from W.R. Alda, the wickedness of men does not come from him. Wickedness comes from heaviness, carelessness, and stupidity, therefore they may well be injurious to men, but never to W.R. Alda. W.R. Alda is wisdom, and the laws that he has made are the books from which we learn, nor is any wisdom to be found or gathered but in them. Men may see a great deal, but W.R. Alda sees everything. Men can learn a great deal, but W.R. Alda knows everything. Men can discover much, but to W.R. Alda everything is open. Mankind are male and female, but W.R. Alda created both. Mankind love and hate, but W.R. Alda alone is just. Therefore W.R. Alda is good, and there is no good without him. In the progress of time all creation alters and changes, but goodness alone is unalterable, and since W.R. Alda is good, he cannot change. As he endures, he alone exists. Everything else is show. The second part of the oldest doctrine. Among Finda's people there are false teachers, who, by their over-inventiveness, have become so wicked that they make themselves and their adherents believe that they are the best part of W.R. Alda. That their spirit is the best part of W.R. Alda's spirit, and that W.R. Alda can only think by the help of their brains. That every creature is a part of W.R. Alda's eternal being, that they have stolen from us, but their false reasoning and ungovernable pride have brought them on the road to ruin. If their spirit was W.R. Alda's spirit, then W.R. Alda would be very stupid, instead of being sensible and wise, for their spirit labors to create beautiful statues, which they afterwards worship. Finda's people are a wicked people, for although they presumptuously pretend among themselves that they are gods, they proclaim the unconsecrated false gods. And declare everywhere that these idols created the world and all that therein is, greedy idols, full of envy and anger, who desire to be served and honored by the people, and who exact bloody sacrifices and rich offerings. But these presumptuous and false men, who call themselves God's servants and priests, receive and collect everything in the name of the idols that have no real existence, for their own benefit. They do all this with an easy conscience, as they think themselves gods not answerable to any one. If there are some who discover their tricks and expose them, they hand them over to the executioners to be burnt for their calumnies, with solemn ceremonies in honor of the false gods, but really in order to save themselves. In order that our children may be protected against their idolatrous doctrine, the duty of the maidens is to make them learn by heart the following: W.R. Alda existed before all things, and will endure after all things. W.R. Alda is also eternal and everlasting, therefore nothing exists without him. From W.R. Alda's life sprang time and all living things, and his life takes away time and every other thing. These things must be made clear and manifest in every way, so that they can be made clear and comprehensible to all. When we have learned thus much, then we say further, in what regards our existence, we are a part of W.R. Alda's everlasting being, like the existence of all created beings. But as regards our form, our qualities, our spirit, and all our thoughts, these do not belong to the being. All these are passing things which appear through W.R. Alda's life, and which appear through his wisdom, and not otherwise. But whereas his life is continually progressing, nothing can remain stationary, therefore all created things change their locality, their form, and their thoughts. So neither the earth nor any other created object can say, I am, but rather, I was. So no man can say, I think, but rather, I thought. The boy is greater and different from the child, he has different desires, inclinations, and thoughts. The man and father feels and thinks differently from the boy, the old man just the same. Everybody knows that. Besides, everybody knows and must acknowledge that he is now changing, that he changes every minute even while he says, I am, and that his thoughts change even while he says, I think. Instead, then, of imitating Finda's wicked people, and saying, I am the best part of Wralda, and through us alone he can think, we proclaim everywhere where it is necessary, we, Freya's children, exist through Wralda's life, in the beginning mean and base, but always advancing towards perfection without ever attaining the excellence of Wralda himself. Our spirit is not Wralda's spirit, it is merely a shadow of it. When Wralda created us, he lent us his wisdom, brains, organs, memory, and many other good qualities. By this means we are able to contemplate his creatures and his laws. By this means we can learn and can speak of them always, and only for our own benefit. If Wralda had given us no organs, we should have known nothing, and been more irrational than a piece of seaweed driven up and down by the ebb and flood. This is written on parchment, scribfilt. Speech and answer to other maidens as an example. An unsociable, avaricious man came to complain to Troost, who was the maid of Stavia. He said a thunderstorm had destroyed his house. He had prayed to Wralda, but Wralda had given him no help. Are you a true Frisian? Troost asked. From father and forefathers, replied the man. Then she said, I will sow something in your conscience, in confidence that it will take root, grow, and bear fruit. She continued, when Freya was born, our mother stood naked and bare, unprotected from the rays of the sun. She could ask no one, and there was no one who could give her any help. Then Wralda wrought in her conscience inclination and love, anxiety and fright. She looked round her, and her inclination chose the best. She sought a hiding place under the sheltering lime trees, but the rain came, and the difficulty was that she got wet. She had seen how the water ran down the pendant leaves. So she made a roof of leaves fastened with sticks, but the wind blew the rain under it. She observed that the stem would afford protection. She then built a wall of sods, first on one side, and then all round. The wind grew stronger and blew away the roof, but she made no complaint of Wralda. She made a roof of rushes, and put stones upon it. Having found how hard it is to toil alone, she showed her children how and why she had done it. They acted and thought as she did. This is the way in which we became possessed of houses and porches, a street, and lime trees to protect us from the rays of the sun. At last we have built a citadel, and all the rest. If your house is not strong enough, then you must try and make another. My house was strong enough, he said, but the flood and the wind destroyed it. Where did your house stand? Troost asked. On the bank of the Rhine, he answered. Did it not stand on a knoll? Troost asked. No, said the man, my house stood alone on the bank. I built it alone, but I could not alone make a hillock. I knew it, Troost answered, the maidens told me. All your life you have avoided your neighbors, fearing that you might have to give or do something for them, but one cannot get on in the world in that way, for Wralda, who is kind, turns away from the niggardly. Fasta has advised us, and it is engraved in stone over all our doors. If you are selfish, distrustful towards your neighbors, teach your neighbors, help your neighbors, and they will return the same to you. If this advice is not good enough for you, I can give you no better. The man blushed for shame, and slunk away. Now I will write myself, first about my citadel, and then about what I have been able to see. My city lies near the north end of the Ludgard. The tower has 6 sides, and is 90 feet high, flat-roofed, with a small house upon it out of which they look at the stars. On either side of the tower is a house 300 feet long, and 21 feet broad, and 21 feet high, besides the roof, which is round. All this is built of hard-baked bricks, and outside there is nothing else. The citadel is surrounded by a dike, with a moat 36 feet broad and 21 feet deep. If one looks down from the tower, he sees the form of the jewel. In the ground among the houses on the south side all kinds of native and foreign herbs grow, of which the maidens must study the qualities. Among the houses on the north side there are only fields. The 3 houses on the north are full of corn and other necessaries, the 2 houses on the south are for the maidens to live in and keep school. The most southern house is the dwelling of the Bergmagd. In the tower hangs the lamp. The walls of the tower are decorated with precious stones. On the south wall the text is inscribed. On the right side of this are the formulae, and on the other side the laws, the other things are found upon the 3 other sides. Against the dike, near the house of the Bergmagd, stand the oven and the mill, worked by 4 oxen. Outside the citadel wall is the place where the Bergthiren and the soldiers live. The fortification outside is an hour long, not a seaman's hour, but an hour of the sun, of which 24 go to a day. Inside it is a plain 5 feet below the top. On it are 300 crossbows covered with wood and leather. Besides the houses of the inhabitants, there are along the inside of the dike 36 refuge houses for the people who live in the neighborhood. The field serves for a camp and for a meadow. On the south side of the outer fortification is the Ludgard, enclosed by the great wood of lime trees. Its shape is 3-cornered, with the widest part outside, so that the sun may shine in it, for there are a great number of foreign trees and flowers brought by the seafarers. All the other citadels are the same shape as ours, only not so large. But the largest of all is that of Texland. The tower of the Fryaburg is so high that it rends the sky, and all the rest is in proportion to the tower. In our citadel this is the arrangement, 7 young maidens attend to the lamp. Each watch is 3 hours. In the rest of their time they do housework, learn, and sleep. When they have watched for 7 years, they are free, then they may go among the people, to look after their morals and to give advice. When they have been 3 years maidens, they may sometimes accompany the older ones. The writer must teach the girls to read, to write, and to reckon. The elders, or griva, must teach them justice and duty, morals, botany, and medicine, history, traditions, and singing, besides all that may be necessary for them to give advice. The Bergmagd must teach them how to set to work when they go among the people. Before a Bergmagd can take office, she must travel through the country a whole year. 3 grey-headed Bergthiren and 3 old maidens must go with her. This was the way that I did. My journey was along the Rhine, on this side up, and on the other side down. The higher I went, the poorer the people seemed to be. Everywhere about the Rhine the people dug holes, and the sand that was got out was poured with water over fleeces to get the gold, but the girls did not wear golden crowns of it. Formerly they were more numerous, but since we lost Skunland they have gone up to the mountains. There they dig ore and make iron. Above the Rhine among the mountains I have seen Marsiten. The Marsiten are people who live on the lakes. Their houses are built upon piles, for protection from the wild beasts and wicked people. There are wolves, bears, and horrible lions. Then come the Swiss, the nearest to the frontiers of the distant Italians, the followers of Kalta and the savage Twisker, all greedy for robbery and booty. The Marsiten gain their livelihood by fishing and hunting. The skins are sewn together by the women, and prepared with birch bark. The small skins are as soft as a woman's skin. The Bergmagd at Freiburg, told us that they were good, simple people. But if I had not heard her speak of them first, I should have thought that they were not Freia's people, they looked so impudent. Their wool and herbs are bought by the Rhine people, and taken to foreign countries by the ship captains. Along the other side of the Rhine it was just the same as at Leidesburcht, Leiden. There was a great river or lake, and upon this lake also there were people living upon piles. But they were not Freia's people. They were black and brown men who had been employed as rowers to bring home the men who had been making foreign voyages, and they had to stay there till the fleet went back. At last we came to Eldurga. At the head of the south harbour lies the Warburg, built of stone, in which all kinds of clothes, weapons, shells, and horns are kept, which were brought by the sea people from distant lands. A quarter of an hour's distance from there is Eldurga, a great river surrounded by houses, sheds, and gardens, all richly decorated. In the river lay a great fleet ready, with banners of all sorts of colours. On Freia's day the shields were hung on board likewise. Some shone like the sun. The shields of the sea king and the admiral were bordered with gold. From the river a canal was dug going past the citadel Brunnen, with a narrow outlet to the sea. This was the egress of the fleet, the fly was the ingress. On both sides of the river are fine houses built, painted in bright colours. The gardens are all surrounded by green hedges. I saw their women wearing felt tunics, as if it were riding felt. Just as at Stavern, the girls wore golden crowns on their heads, and rings on their arms and ankles. To the south of Farana lies Alkmarum. Alkmarum is a lake or river in which there is an island. On this island the black and brown people must remain, the same as at Leidesburgt. The Bergmagd of Farana told me that the Bergthiren go every day to teach them what real freedom is, and how it behoves men to live in order to obtain the blessing of Wralda's spirit. If there was anyone who was willing to listen and could comprehend, he was kept there till he was fully taught. That was done in order to instruct the distant people, and to make friends everywhere. I had been before in the Saxenmarken, at the Manigardeford Castle, Munster. There I saw more poverty than I could discover wealth here. She answered, so whenever at the Saxenmarken a young man courts a young girl, the girls ask, can you keep your house free from the banished Twistlanders? Have you ever killed any of them? How many cattle have you already caught, and how many bear and wolfskins have you brought to market? And from this it comes that the Saxons have left the cultivation of the soil to the women, that not 1 in 100 can read or write. From this it comes, too, that no one has a motto on his shield, but only a misshapen form of some animal that he has killed. And lastly, from this comes also that they are very warlike, but sometimes as stupid as the beasts that they catch, and as poor as the Twistlanders with whom they go to war. The earth and the sea were made for Freia's people. All our rivers run into the sea. The Lydas people and the Findus people will exterminate each other, and we must people the empty countries. In movement and sailing is our prosperity. If you wish the Highlanders to share our riches and wisdom, I will give you a piece of advice. Let the girls, when they are asked to marry, before they say yes, ask their lovers, what parts of the world have you traveled in? What can you tell your children about distant lands and distant people? If they do this, then the young warriors will come to us, they will become wiser and richer, and we shall have no occasion to deal with those nasty people. The youngest of the maids who were with me came from the Saxenmarken. When we came back she asked leave to go home. Afterward she became Bergmagd there, and that is the reason why in these days so many of our sailors are Saxons. End of Apollonia's book. Felt, very thin and compressed, with a smooth surface. The writings of Fretheric and Wiljo. My name is Fretheric, surnamed Oralinda, which means over the linden. In Uljadwardia I was chosen as Aska. Uljadwardia is a new village within the fortification of the Uljajarda, of which the name has fallen into disrepute. In my time much has happened. I had written a good deal about it, but afterwards much more was related to me. I will write an account of both one and the other after this book, to the honor of the good people and to the disgrace of the bad. In my youth I heard complaints on all sides. The bad time was coming, the bad time did come, Freya had forsaken us. She withheld from us all her watch maidens, because monstrous idolatrous images had been found within our landmarks. I burnt with curiosity to see those images. In our neighborhood a little old woman tottered in and out of the houses, always calling out about the bad times. I came to her, she stroked my chin, then I became bold, and asked her if she would show me the bad times and the images. She laughed good-naturedly, and took me to the citadel. An old man asked me if I could read and write. No, I said. Then you must first go and learn, he replied, otherwise it may not be shown to you. I went daily to the writer and learnt. 8 years afterwards I heard that our Burgmag had been unchaste, and that some of the Burgfirren had committed treason with the Magi, and many people took their part. Everywhere disputes arose. There were children rebelling against their parents, good people were secretly murdered. The little old woman who had brought everything to light was found dead in a ditch. My father, who was a judge, would have her avenged. He was murdered in the night in his own house. 3 years after that the Magi was master without any resistance. The Sax men had remained religious and upright. All the good people fled to them. My mother died of it. Now I did like the others. The Magi prided himself upon his cunning, but Eartha made him know that she would not tolerate any Magi or idol on the holy bosom that had borne Freya. As a wild horse tosses his mane after he has thrown his rider, so Eartha shook her forests and her mountains. Rivers flowed over the land, the sea raged. Mountains spouted fire to the clouds, and what they vomited forth the clouds flung upon the earth. At the beginning of the Arnmend, harvest month, the earth bowed towards the north, and sank down lower and lower. In the Welvenmend, winter month, the low lands of Friesland were buried under the sea. The woods in which the images were torn up and scattered by the wind. The following year the frost came in the Hardmend, Laumend, January, and laid Friesland concealed under a sheet of ice. In Selamand, Sprakelmand, February, there were storms of wind from the north, driving mountains of ice and stones. When the spring tides came the earth raised herself up, the ice melted, with the ebb the forests with the images drifted out to sea. In the Win, or Minmand, Bloemand, May, every one who dared went home. I came with a maiden to the citadel Ludgard. How sad it looked there. The forests of the Lindorden were almost all gone. Where Ludgard used to be was sea. The waves swept over the fortifications. Ice had destroyed the tower, and the houses lay heaped over each other. On the slope of the dike I found a stone on which the writer had inscribed his name. That was a sign to me. The same thing had happened to other citadels as to ours. In the upper lands they had been destroyed by the earth, in the lower lands by the water. Friesberg, at Texland, was the only one found uninjured, but all the land to the north was sunk under the sea, and has never been recovered. At the mouth of the Flymere, as we were told, 30 salt swamps were found, consisting of the forest and the ground that had been swept away. At West Flyland there were 50. The canal which had run across the land from Aldurga was filled up with sand and destroyed. The seafaring people and other travelers who were at home had saved themselves, their goods, and their relations upon their ships. But the black people at Leidesburg and Alkmarum had done the same, and as they went south they saved many girls, and as no one came to claim them, they took them for their wives. The people who came back all lived within the lines of the citadel, as outside there was nothing but mud and marsh. The old houses were all smashed together. People bought cattle and sheep from the upper lands, and in the great houses where formerly the maidens were established cloth and felt were made for a livelihood. This happened 1888 years after the submersion of Atland. For 282 years we had not had an Iramutter, and now, when everything seemed lost, they set about choosing one. The lot fell upon Gosa, surnamed Makonta. She was Burgmagd at Friesberg, in Texland. She had a clear head and strong sense, and was very good, and as her citadel was the only one that had been spared, every one saw in that her call. 10 years after that the seafarers came from Farana and Leidesburg. They wished to drive the black men, with their wives and children, out of the country. They wished to obtain the opinion of the mother upon the subject. She asked them, "Can you send them all back to their country? If so, then lose no time, or they will find no relatives alive." "No," they said. Gosa replied, "They have eaten your bread and salt, they have placed themselves entirely under your protection. You must consult your own hearts. But I will give you one piece of advice. Keep them till you are able to send them back, but keep them outside your citadels. Watch over their morals, and educate them as if they were Freya's sons. Their women are the strongest here. Their blood will disappear like smoke, till at last nothing but Freya's blood will remain in their descendants." So they remained here. Now, I should wish that my descendants should observe in how far Gosa spoke the truth. When our country began to recover, there came troops of poor Saxon men and women to the neighborhoods of Stavren and Aldurga, to search for gold and other treasures in the swampy lands. But the sea people would not permit it, so they went and settled in the empty village of the West Flyland in order to preserve their lives. Now I will relate how the Gertman and many followers of Helenia came back. 2 years after Gosa had become the mother, 303 BC, there arrived a fleet at Flymere. The people shouted, "Hohenstein, what a blessing!" They sailed to Stavren, where they shouted again. Their flags were hoisted, and at night they shot lighted arrows into the air. At daylight some of them rowed into the harbor in a boat, shouting again, "Hohenstein." When they landed a young fellow jumped upon the rampart. In his hand he held a shield on which bread and salt were laid. After him came a grey-headed man, who said, "We come from the distant Greek land to preserve our customs. Now we wish you to be kind enough to give us as much land as will enable us to live." He told a long story, which I will hereafter relate more fully. The old man did not know what to do. They sent messengers all round, also to me. I went, and said, "Now that we have a mother it behoves us to ask her advice." I went with them myself. The mother, who already knew it all, said, "Let them come, they will help us to keep our lands, but do not let them remain in one place, that they may not become too powerful over us." We did as she said, which was quite to their liking. Friso remained with his people at Stavren, which they made again into a port as well as they could. Wichert went with his people eastwards to the Amud. Some of the descendants of John who imagined that they sprang from the Aldurga people went there. A small number, who fancied that their forefathers had come from the Seven Islands, went there and set themselves down within the enclosure of the citadel of Walhalagra. Lugert, the admiral of Witchherd, was my comrade, and afterwards my friend. Out of his diary I have taken the following history. After we had been settled 12 times 100 and twice 12 years in the five waters, Punjab, whilst our naval warriors were navigating all the seas they could find, came Alexander the king, with a powerful army descending the river towards our villages. No one could withstand him, but we sea people, who lived by the sea, put all our possessions on board ships and took our departure. When Alexander heard that such a large fleet had escaped him, he became furious, and swore that he would burn all the villages if we did not come back. Witchert was ill in bed. When Alexander heard that, he waited till he was better. After that he came to him, speaking very kindly, but he deceived, as he had done before. Witchert answered, O greatest of kings, we sailors go everywhere. We have heard of your great deeds, therefore we are full of respect for your arms, and still more for your wisdom, but we who are freeborn Friar's children, we may not become your slaves. And even if I would, the others would sooner die, for so it is commanded in our laws. Alexander said, I do not desire to take your land or make slaves of your people, I only wish to hire your services. That I will swear by both our gods, so that no one may be dissatisfied. When Alexander shared bread and salt with him, Witchert had chosen the wisest part. He let his son fetch the ships. When they were all come back Alexander hired them all. By means of them he wished to transport his people to the holy Ganges, which he had not been able to reach. Then he chose among all his people and soldiers those who were accustomed to the sea. Witchert had fallen sick again, therefore I went alone with Nearchus, sent by the king. The voyage came to an end without any advantage, because the Joniers and the Phoenicians were always quarreling, so that Nearchus himself could not keep them in order. In the meantime, the king had not sat still. He had let his soldiers cut down trees and make planks, with which, with the help of our carpenters, he had built ships. Now he would himself become a sea king, and sail with his whole army up the Ganges. But the soldiers who came from the mountainous countries were afraid of the sea. When they heard that they must sail, they set fire to the timber yards, and so our whole village was laid in ashes. At first we thought that this had been done by Alexander's orders, and we were all ready to cast ourselves into the sea, but Alexander was furious, and wished his own people to kill the soldiers. However, Nearchus, who was not only his chief officer, but also his friend, advised him not to do so. So he pretended to believe that it had happened by accident, and said no more about it. He wished now to return, but before going he made an inquiry who really were the guilty ones. As soon as he ascertained it, he had them all disarmed, and made them build a new village. His own people he kept under arms to overawe the others, and to build a citadel. We were to take the women and children with us. When we arrived at the mouth of the Euphrates, we might either choose a place to settle there or come back. Our pay would be guaranteed to us the same in either case. Upon the new ships which had been saved from the fire he embarked the Joniers and the Greeks. He himself went with the rest of his people along the coast, through the barren wilderness. That is, through the land that Eartha picked up out of the sea when she had raised up the strait as soon as our forefathers had passed into the Red Sea. When we arrived at New Jerkmania is the port that we had made in order to take in water, we met Alexander with his army. Nearchus went ashore, and stayed 3 days. Then we proceeded further on. When we came to the Euphrates, Nearchus went ashore with the soldiers in a large body of people, but he soon returned, and said, The king requests you, for his sake, to go a voyage up the Red Sea. After that each shall receive as much gold as he can carry. When we arrived there, he showed us where the strait had formerly been. There he spent 31 days, always looking steadily towards the desert. At last there arrived a great troop of people, bringing with them 200 elephants, 1,000 camels, a quantity of timber, ropes, and all kinds of implements necessary to drag our fleet to the Mediterranean Sea. This astounded us, and seemed most extraordinary, but Nearchus told us that his king wished to show to the other kings that he was more powerful than any kings of Tyre had ever been. We were only to assist, and that surely could do us no harm. We were obliged to yield, and Nearchus knew so well how to regulate everything, that before 3 months had elapsed our ships lay in the Mediterranean Sea. When Alexander ascertained how his project had succeeded, he became so audacious that he wished to dig out the dried-up strait in defiance of Eartha. But Wralda deserted his soul, so that he destroyed himself by wine and rashness before he could begin it. After his death his kingdom was divided among his princes. They were each to have preserved a share for his sons, but that was not their intention. Each wished to keep his own share, and to get more. Then war arose, and we could not return. Nearchus wished us to settle on the coast of Phoenicia, but that no one would do. We said we would rather risk the attempt to return to Friesland. Then he brought us to the new port of Athens, where all the true children of Phrygia had formerly gone. We went, soldiers with our goods and weapons. Among the many princes Nearchus had a friend named Antigonus. These two had only one object in view, as they told us, to help the royal race, and to restore freedom to all the Greek lands. Antigonus had, among many others, one son named Demetrius, afterwards called the City Winner. He went once to the town of Salamis, and after he had been some time fighting there, he had an engagement with the fleet of Ptolemy. Ptolemy was the name of the prince who reigned over Egypt. Demetrius won the battle, not by his own soldiers, but because we helped him. We had done this out of friendship for Nearchus, because we knew that he was of bastard birth by his white skin, blue eyes, and fair hair. Afterwards, Demetrius attacked Rhodes, and we transported thither his soldiers and provisions. When we made our last voyage to Rhodes, the war was finished. Demetrius had sailed to Athens. When we came into the harbor, the whole village was in deep mourning. Phryso, who was king over the fleet, had a son and a daughter so remarkably fair, as if they had just come out of Friesland, and more beautiful than anyone could picture to himself. The fame of this went all over Greece, and came to the ears of Demetrius. Demetrius was vile and immoral, and thought he could do as he pleased. He carried off the daughter. The mother did not dare await the return of her joy. The sailors' wives call their husbands joy or zothart, sweetheart. The men call their wives troost, comfort, and fro or fro, that is, vrewide, delight, and frolic, that is the same as vrogt. As she dared not wait for her husband's return, she went with her son to Demetrius, and implored him to send back her daughter, but when Demetrius saw the son he had him taken to his palace, and did to him as he had done to his sister. He sent a bag of gold to the mother, which she flung into the sea. When she came home she was out of her mind, and ran about the streets calling out, "Have you seen my children? Woe is me! Let me find a place to hide in, for my husband will kill me because I have lost his children." When Demetrius heard that Phryso had come home, he sent messengers to him to say that he had taken his children to raise them to high rank, and to reward him for his services. But Phryso was proud and passionate, and sent a messenger with a letter to his children, in which he recommended them to accept the will of Demetrius, as he wished to promote their happiness. But the messenger had another letter with poison, which he ordered them to take, but, said he, your bodies have been defiled against your will. That you are not to blame for, but if your souls are not pure, you will never come into Valhalla. Your spirits will haunt the earth in darkness. Like the bats and owls, you will hide yourselves in the daytime in holes, and in the night will come and shriek and cry about our graves, while Freya must turn her head away from you. The children did as their father had commanded. The messenger had their bodies thrown into the sea, and it was reported that they had fled. Now Phryso wished to go with all his people to Freya's land, where he had been formerly, but most of them would not go. So Phryso set fire to the village and all the royal storehouses, then no one could remain there, and all were glad to be out of it. We left everything behind us except wives and children, but we had an ample stock of provisions and warlike implements. Phryso was not yet satisfied. When we came to the old harbor, he went off with his stout soldiers and threw fire into all the ships that he could reach with his arrows. 6 days later we saw the war fleet of Demetrius coming down upon us. Phryso ordered us to keep back the small ships in a broad line, and to put the large ships with the women and children in front. Further, he ordered us to take the crossbows that were in the forepart and fix them on the sterns of the ships, because, said he, we must fight a retreating battle. No man must presume to pursue a single enemy, that is my order. While we were busy about this, all at once the wind came ahead, to the great alarm of the cowards and the women, because we had no slaves except those who had voluntarily followed us. Therefore we could not escape the enemy by rowing. But Oera knew well why he did this, and Phryso, who understood it, immediately had the fire arrows placed on the crossbows. At the same time he gave the order that no one should shoot before he did, and that we should all aim at the center ship. If we succeeded in this, he said, the others would all go to its assistance, and then everybody might shoot as he best was able. When we were at a cable and a half distance from them the Phoenicians began to shoot, but Phryso did not reply till the first arrow fell 6 fathoms from his ship. Then he fired, and the rest followed. It was like a shower of fire. And as our arrows went with the wind, they all remained alight and reached the third line. Everybody shouted and cheered, but the screams of our opponents were so loud that our hearts shrank. When Phryso thought that it was sufficient he called us off, and we sped away, but after 2 days slow sailing another fleet of 30 ships came in sight and gained upon us. Phryso cleared for action again, but the others sent forward a small rowing boat with messengers, who asked permission to sail with us, as they were Joniars. They had been compelled by Demetrius to go to the old haven. There they had heard of the battle, and girding on their stout swords, had followed us. Phryso, who had sailed a good deal with the Joniars, said yes, but Wichert, our king, said no. The Joniars, said he, are worshippers of heathen gods. I myself have heard them call upon them. That comes from their intercourse with the real Greeks, Phryso said. I have often done it myself, and yet I am as pious a Freya's man as any of you. Phryso was the man to take us to Friesland, therefore the Joniars went with us. It seems that this was pleasing to Oera, for before 3 months were past we coasted along Britain, and 3 days later we could shout huzzah. This writing has been given to me about Northland and Skånland, Scandinavia. When our land was submerged I was in Skånland. It was very bad there. There were great lakes which rose from the earth like bubbles, then burst asunder, and from the rents flowed a stuff like red-hot iron. The tops of high mountains fell and destroyed whole forests and villages. I myself saw one mountain torn from another and fall straight down. When I afterwards went to see the place there was a lake there. When the earth was composed there came a Duke of Lindisberg with his people, and one maiden who cried everywhere, Maggie is the cause of all the misery that we have suffered. They continued their progress, and their hosts increased. The Maggie fled, and his corpse was found where he had killed himself. Then the Finns were driven to one place where they might live. There were some of mixed blood who were allowed to stay, but most of them went with the Finns. The Duke was chosen as king. The temples which had remained whole were destroyed. Since that time the good Northmen come often to Texland for the advice of the mother, still we cannot consider them real Frisians. In Denmark it has certainly happened as with us. The sea people, who call themselves famous sea warriors, went on board their ships, and afterwards went back again. Hail! Whenever the carrier has completed a period, then posterity shall understand that the faults and misdeeds that the Brockmanen have brought with them belonged to their forefathers. Therefore I will watch, and will describe as much of their manners as I have seen. The Gertmannen I can readily pass by. I have not had much to do with them, but as far as I have seen they have mostly retained their language and customs. I cannot say that of the others. Those who descend from the Greeks speak a bad language, and have not much to boast of in their manners. Many have brown eyes and hair. They are envious and impudent, and cowardly from superstition. When they speak, they put the words first that ought to come last. For old they at, for salt, sat, and for man, ma, too many to mention. They also use abbreviations of names, which have no meaning. The Jonier speak better, but they drop the H, and put it where it ought not to be. When they make a statue of a dead person they believe that the spirit of the departed enters into it. Therefore they have hidden their statues of Phrygia, Fasta, Medea, Diania, Helenia, and many others. When a child is born, all the relatives come together and pray to Phrygia to send her servants to bless the child. When they have prayed, they must neither move nor speak. If the child begins to cry, and continue some time, it is a bad sign, and they suspect that the mother has committed adultery. I have seen very bad things come from that. If the child sleeps, that is a good sign, Phrygia's servants are come. If it laughs in its sleep, the servants have promised it happiness. Moreover, they believe in bad spirits, witches, sorcerers, dwarfs, and elves, as if they descended from the Finns. Herewith I will finish, and I think I have written more than any of my forefathers. Fretheric. Fretheric, my husband, lived to the age of 63. Since 108 years he is the first of his race who died a peaceable death. All the others died by violence, because they all fought with their own people, and with foreigners for right and duty. My name is Wiljo. I am the maiden who came home with him from Saxenmarken. In the course of conversation it came out that we were both of Adela's race, thus our affection commenced, and we became man and wife. He left me with 5 children, 2 sons and 3 daughters. Conried was my eldest son, Hachgana my second. My eldest daughter is called Adela, my second Fröhlich, and the youngest Nacht. When I went to Saxenmarken I preserved 3 books, the Book of Songs, the Book of Narratives, and the Helenia book. I write this in order that people may not think they were by Apollonia. I have had a good deal of annoyance about this, and therefore now wish to have the honor of it. I also did more. When Gosumakanta died, whose goodness and clear-sightedness have become a proverb, I went alone to Texland to copy the writings that she had left. And when the last will of Frana was found, and the writings left by Adela or Helenia, I did that again. These are the writings of Helenia. I have put them first because they are the oldest. Hail to all true Frisians. In the olden times, the Slavonic race knew nothing of liberty. They were brought under the yoke like oxen. They were driven into the bowels of the earth to dig metals, and had to build houses of stone as dwelling places for princes and priests. Of all that they did nothing came to themselves, everything must serve to enrich and make more powerful the priests and the princes, and to satisfy them. Under this treatment they grew grey and old before their time, and died without any enjoyment. Although the earth produces abundantly for the good of all her children. But our runaways and exiles came through Twistland to their boundaries, and our sailors came to their harbors. From them they heard of liberty, of justice, and laws, without which men cannot exist. This was all absorbed by the unhappy people like dew into an arid soil. When they fully understood this, the most courageous among them began to clank their chains, which grieved the princes. The princes are proud and warlike, there is therefore some virtue in their hearts. They consulted together and bestowed some of their superfluity, but the cowardly hypocritical priests could not suffer this. Among their false gods they had invented also wicked cruel monsters. Pestilence broke out in the country. And they said that the gods were angry with the domineering of the wicked. Then the boldest of the people were strangled in their chains. The earth drank their blood, and that blood produced corn and fruits that inspired with wisdom those who ate them. 1600 years ago, she writes, 593 BC, Atland was submerged. And at that time something happened which nobody had reckoned upon. In the heart of Findusland, upon a mountain, lies a plain called Kashmir, that is, extraordinary. There was a child born whose mother was the daughter of a king, and whose father was a high priest. In order to hide the shame they were obliged to renounce their own blood. Therefore it was taken out of the town to poor people. As the boy grew up, nothing was concealed from him, so he did all in his power to acquire wisdom. His intellect was so great that he understood everything that he saw or heard. The people regarded him with respect, and the priests were afraid of his questions. When he was of full age he went to his parents. They had to listen to some hard language. And to get rid of him they gave him a quantity of jewels, but they dared not openly acknowledge him. Overcome with sorrow at the false shame of his parents, he wandered about. While traveling he fell in with a Frisian sailor who was serving as a slave, and who taught him our manners and customs. He bought the freedom of the slave, and they remained friends till death. Wherever he went he taught the people not to tolerate rich men or priests, and that they must guard themselves against false shame, which everywhere did harm to love and charity. The earth, he said, bestowed her treasures on those who scratch her skin, so all are obliged to dig, and plow, and sow if they wish to reap, but no one is obliged to do anything for another unless it be out of goodwill. He taught that men should not seek in her bowels for gold, or silver, or precious stones, which occasion envy and destroy love. To embellish your wives and daughters, he said, the river offers her pure stream. No man is able to make everybody equally rich and happy, but it is the duty of all men to make each other as equally rich and as happy as possible. Men should not despise any knowledge. But justice is the greatest knowledge that time can teach, because she wards off offenses and promotes love. His first name was Jessos, but the priests, who hated him, called him Fo, that is, false, the people called him Krishna, that is, shepherd. And his Frisian friend called him Buddha, purse, because he had in his head a treasure of wisdom, and in his heart a treasure of love. At last he was obliged to flee from the wrath of the priests. But wherever he went his teaching had preceded him, whilst his enemies followed him like his shadow. When Jessos had thus travelled for 12 years he died, but his friends preserved his teaching, and spread it wherever they found listeners. What do you think the priests did then? That I must tell you, and you must give your best attention to it. Moreover, you must keep guard against their acts and their tricks with all the strength that Wralda has given you. While the doctrine of Jessos was thus spreading over the earth, the false priests went to the land of his birth to make his death known. They said they were his friends, and they pretended to show great sorrow by tearing their clothes and shaving their heads. They went to live in caves in the mountains, but in them they had hid all their treasures, and they made in them images of Jessos. They gave these statues to simple people, and at last they said that Jessos was a god, that he had declared this himself to them, and that all those who followed his doctrine should enter his kingdom hereafter, where all was joy and happiness. Because they knew that he was opposed to the rich, they announced everywhere that poverty, suffering, and humility were the door by which to enter into his kingdom. And that those who had suffered the most on earth should enjoy the greatest happiness there. Although they knew that Jessos had taught that men should regulate and control their passions, they taught that men should stifle their passions, and that the perfection of humanity consisted in being as unfeeling as the cold stones. In order to make the people believe that they did as they preached, they pretended to outward poverty, and that they had overcome all sensual feelings, they took no wives. But if any young girl had made a false step, it was quickly forgiven. The weak, they said, were to be assisted, and to save their souls men must give largely to the church. Acting in this way, they had wives and children without households, and were rich without working. But the people grew poorer and more miserable than they had ever been before. This doctrine, which requires the priests to possess no further knowledge than to speak deceitfully, and to pretend to be pious while acting unjustly, spreads from east to west, and will come to our land also. But when the priests fancy that they have entirely extinguished the light of Phria and Jessos, then shall all classes of men rise up who have quietly preserved the truth among themselves, and have hidden it from the priests. They shall be of princely blood of priests, Slavonic, and Phria's blood. They will make their light visible, so that all men shall see the truth, they shall cry woe to the acts of the princes and the priests. The princes who love the truth and justice shall separate themselves from the priests, blood shall flow, but from it the people will gather new strength. Finda's folk shall contribute their industry to the common good, Linda's folk their strength, and we our wisdom. Then the false priests shall be swept away from the earth. Wralda's spirit shall be invoked everywhere and always. The laws that Wralda in the beginning instilled into our consciences shall alone be listened to. There shall be neither princes, nor masters, nor rulers, except those chosen by the general voice. Then Phria shall rejoice, and the earth will only bestow her gifts on those who work. All this shall begin 4,000 years after the submersion of Atlant, and 1,000 years later there shall exist no longer either priest or oppression. Della, surnamed Helenia, watch. Thus runs Frana's last will, all noble Frisians, Heil. In the name of Wralda, of Phria, and of freedom, I greet you. And pray you if I die before I have named a successor, then I recommend to you Tunja, who is Bergmagd in the citadel of Mediasplik, till now she is the best. This Gosa has left behind her, hail to all men. I have named no Iramutter, because I know none, and because it is better for you to have no mother than to have one you cannot trust. One bad time is passed by, but there is still another coming. Bertha has not given it birth, and Wralda has not decreed it. It comes from the east, out of the bosom of the priests. It will breed so much mischief that Bertha will not be able to drink the blood of her slain children. It will spread darkness over the minds of men like storm clouds over the sunlight. Everywhere craft and deception shall contend with freedom and justice. Freedom and justice shall be overcome, and we with them. But this success will work out its own loss. Our descendants shall teach their people and their slaves the meaning of 3 words, they are universal love, freedom, and justice. At first they shall shine, then struggle with darkness, until every man's head and heart has become bright and clear. Then shall oppression be driven from the earth, like the thunderclouds by the storm wind, and all deceit will cease to have any more power. Gosa. The writing of Konrad. My forefathers have written this book in succession. I will do this, the more because there exists no longer in my state any citadel on which events are inscribed as used to be the case. My name is Konrad. My father's name was Frethric, my mother's name was Wiljo. After my father's death I was chosen as his successor. When I was 50 years old I was chosen for chief brevetman. My father has written how the Lindorden and Ludgarden were destroyed. Lindehem is still lost, the Lindorden partially, and the North Lindgarden are still concealed by the salt sea. The foaming sea washes the ramparts of the castle. As my father has mentioned, the people, being deprived of their harbor, went away and built houses inside the ramparts of the citadel, therefore that bastion is called Lindward. The sea people say Lindward, but that is nonsense. In my youth there was a portion of land lying outside the rampart all mud and marsh, but Phria's people were neither tired or exhausted when they had a good object in view. By digging ditches, and making dams of the earth that came out of the ditches, we recovered a good space of land outside the rampart, which had the form of a hoof 3 poles eastward, 3 southwards, and 3 westwards. At present we are engaged in ramming piles into the ground to make a harbor to protect our rampart. When the work is finished we shall attract mariners. In my youth it looked very queer, but now there stands a row of houses. Leaks and deficiencies produced by poverty have been remedied by industry. From this men may learn that Wralda, our universal father, protects all his creatures, if they preserve their courage and help each other. Now I will write about Friso. Friso, who was already powerful by his troops, was chosen chief brevetman of the districts round Stavern. He laughed at our mode of defending our land and our sea fights. Therefore he established a school where the boys might learn to fight in the Greek manner, but I believe that he did it to attach the young people to himself. I sent my brother there 10 years ago, because I thought, now that we have not got any mother, it behoves me to be doubly watchful, in order that he may not become our master. Gosa has given us no successors. I will not give any opinion about that. But there are still old suspicious people who think that she and Friso had an understanding about it. When Gosa died, the people from all parts wished to choose another mother. But Friso, who was busy establishing a kingdom for himself, did not desire to have any advice or messenger from Texland. When the messengers of the land Satan came to him, he said that Gosa had been far-seeing and wiser than all the counts together, and yet she had been unable to see any light or way out of this affair. Therefore she had not had the courage to choose a successor, and to choose a doubtful one she thought would be very bad, therefore she wrote in her last will, "It is better to have no mother than to have one on whom you cannot rely." Friso had seen a great deal. He had been brought up in the wars, and he had just learned and gathered as much of the tricks and cunning ways of the Gauls and the princes as he required, to lead the other counts wherever he wished. See here how he went to work about that. Friso had taken here another wife, a daughter of Wilfrid, who in his lifetime had been chief count of Stavren. By her he had 2 sons and 2 daughters. By his wish Cornelia, his youngest daughter, was married to my brother. Cornelia is not good Frisian, her name ought to be written Cornhelia. Wemode, his eldest daughter, he married to Koch. Koch, who went to school to him, is the son of Wichert, the king of the Gertmen. But Koch is likewise not good Frisian, and ought to be Coop. So they have learned more bad language than good manners. Now I must return to my story. After the great flood of which my father wrote an account, there came many Jutlanders and Letlanders out of the Baltic, or Bad Sea. They were driven down the Kattegat in their boats by the ice as far as the coast of Denmark, and there they remained. There was not a creature to be seen, so they took possession of the land, and named it after themselves, Jutland. Afterwards many of the Denmarkers returned from the higher lands, but they settled more to the south. And when the mariners returned who had not been lost, they all went together to Zealand. By this arrangement the Jutlanders retained the land to which Oera had conducted them. The Zealand skippers, who were not satisfied to live upon fish, and who hated the Gauls, took to robbing the Phoenician ships. In the southwest point of Scandinavia there lies Lindisberg, called Lindisnos, built by one Apol, as is written in the book. All the people who live on the coasts, and in the neighboring districts, had remained true Frisians. But by their desire for vengeance upon the Gauls, and the followers of Caltona, they joined the Zealanders. But that connection did not hold together, because the Zealanders had adopted many evil manners and customs of the wicked Magyars, in opposition to Freya's people. Afterwards, everybody went stealing on his own account. But when it suited them they held all together. At last the Zealanders began to be in want of good ships. Their shipbuilders had died, and their forests as well as their land had been washed out to sea. Now there arrived unexpectedly 3 ships, which anchored off the ringdike of our citadel. By the disruption of our land they had lost themselves, and had missed Flyman. The merchant who was with them wished to buy new ships from us, and for that purpose had brought all kinds of valuables, which they had stolen from the Celtic country and Phoenician ships. As we had no ships, I gave them active horses and 4 armed couriers to Friso, because at Stavra, along the Alberga, the best ships of war were built of hard oak which never rots. While these sea rovers remained with us, some of the Jutmen had gone to Texland, and thence to Friso. The Zealanders had stolen many of their strongest boys to row their ships, and many of their finest daughters to have children by. The great Jutlanders could not prevent it, as they were not properly armed. When they had related all their misfortunes, and a good deal of conversation had taken place, Friso asked them at last if they had no good harbors in their country. Oh, yes, they answered, a beautiful one, created by Oera. It is like a bottle, the neck narrow, but in the belly 1,000 large boats may lie, but we have no citadel and no defenses to keep out the pirate ships. Then you should make them, said Friso. That is very good advice, said the Jutlanders, but we have no workmen and no building materials, we are all fishermen and trawlers. The others are drowned or fled to the higher lands. While they were talking in this way, my messengers arrived at the court with the Zealand gentlemen. Here you must observe how Friso understood deceiving everybody, to the satisfaction of both parties, and to the accomplishment of his own ends. To the Zealanders he promised that they should have yearly 50 ships of a fixed size for a fixed price, fitted with iron chains and crossbows, and full rigging as is necessary and useful for men of war. But that they should leave in peace the Jutlanders and all the people of Freya's race. But he wished to do more, he wanted to engage all our sea rovers to go with him upon his fighting expedition. When the Zealanders had gone, he loaded 40 old ships with weapons for wall defenses, wood, bricks, carpenters, masons, and smiths, in order to build citadels. Widow, or Wit, his son, he sent to superintend. I have never been well informed of what happened, but this much is clear to me, that on each side of the harbor a strong citadel has been built, and garrisoned by people brought by Friso out of Saxamarken. Widow courted Syagthert and married her. Wilhelm, her father, was chief alderman of the Jutmen, that is, chief brevetman or count. Wilhelm died shortly afterwards, and Widow was chosen in his place. What Friso did further. Of his first wife he still had 2 brothers-in-law, who were very daring. Hedo, that is, Heat, the youngest, he sent as messenger to Kattebergt, which lies far in the Saxamarken. Friso gave him to take 7 horses, besides his own, laden with precious things stolen by the sea rovers. With each horse there were 2 young sea rovers and 2 young horsemen, clad in rich garments, and with money in their purses. In the same way as he sent Hedo to Kattebergt, he sent Bruno, that is, Brown, the other brother-in-law, to Manigarda Ord. Manigarda Ord was written Manigarda Ford in the earlier part of this book, but that is wrong. All the riches that they took with them were given away, according to circumstances, to princes, princesses, and chosen young girls. When his young men went to the tavern to dance with the young people there, they ordered baskets of spice, gingerbread, and tons of the best beer. After these messengers he let his young people constantly go over to the Saxamarken, always with money in their purses and presents to give away, and they spent money carelessly in the taverns. When the Saxon youths looked with envy at this they smiled, and said, if you dare go and fight the common enemy you would be able to give much richer presents to your brides, and live much more princely. Both the brothers-in-law of Friso had married daughters of the chief princes, and afterwards the Saxon youths and girls came in whole troops to the Flymere. The bird maidens and old maidens who still remembered their greatness did not hold with Friso's object, and therefore they said no good of him. But Friso, more cunning than they, let them chatter, but the younger maidens he led to his side with golden fingers. They said everywhere, for a long time we have had no mother, but that comes from our being fit to take care of ourselves. At present it suits us best to have a king to win back our lands that we have lost through the imprudence of our mothers. Further they said, every child of Freya has permission to let his voice be heard before the choice of a prince is decided. But if it comes to that you choose a king, then also we will have our say. From all that we can see, Wralda has appointed Friso for it, for he has brought him here in a wonderful way. Friso knows the tricks of the Gauls, whose language he speaks, he can therefore watch against their craftiness. Then there is something else to keep the eye upon. What count could be chosen as king without the others being jealous of him? All such nonsense the young maidens talked, but the old maidens, though few in number, tapped their advice out of another cask. They said always and to every one, Friso does like the spiders. At night he spreads his webs in all directions, and in the day he catches in them all his unsuspecting friends. Friso says he cannot suffer any priests or foreign princes, but we say that he cannot suffer anybody but himself. Therefore he will not allow the citadel of Stavia to be rebuilt, therefore he will not have the mother again. Today Friso is your counselor, tomorrow he will be your king, in order to have full power over you. Among the people there now existed two parties. The old and the poor wished to have the mother again, but the young and the warlike wished for a father and a king. The first called themselves mother's sons, the others father's sons, but the mother's sons did not count for much, because there were many ships to build, there was a good time for all kinds of workmen. Moreover, the seer-overs brought all sorts of treasures, with which the maidens were pleased, the girls were pleased, and their relations and friends. When Friso had been nearly 40 years at Stavern he died. Owing to him many of the states have been joined together again, but that we were the better for it I am not prepared to certify. Of all the counts that preceded him there was none so renowned as Friso. For, as I said before, the young maidens spoke in his praise, while the old maidens did all in their power to make him hateful to everybody. Although the old women could not prevent his meddling, they made so much fuss that he died without becoming king. Now I will write about his son Adel. Friso, who had learned our history from the book of the Adelingen, had done everything in his power to win their friendship. His eldest son, whom he had by his wife Swethard, he named Adel. And although he strove with all his might to prevent the building or restoring any citadels, he sent Adel to the citadel of Texland in order to make himself better acquainted with our laws, language, and customs. When Adel was 20 years old Friso brought him into his own school, and when he had fully educated him he sent him to travel through all the states. Adel was an amiable young man, and in his travels he made many friends, so the people called him a Theric, that is, rich in friends, which was very useful to him afterwards. For when his father died he took his place without a question of any other count being chosen. While Adel was studying at Texland there was a lovely maiden at the citadel. She came from Saxenmarken, from the state of Suobaland, therefore she was called at Texland Suabine, although her name was Ifja. Adel fell in love with her, and she with him, but his father wished him to wait a little. Adel did as he wished, but as soon as he was dead, sent messengers to Berthold, her father, to ask her in marriage. Berthold was a prince of high-principled feelings. He had sent his daughter to Texland in the hope that she might be chosen Burgmagd in her country, but when he knew of their mutual affection he bestowed his blessing upon them. Ifja was a clever Frisian. As far as I have been able to learn, she always toiled and worked to bring the Frias people back under the same laws and customs. To bring the people to her side, she traveled with her husband through all Saxenmarken, and also to Gertmania, as the Gertmen had named the country which they had obtained by means of Gosa. Thence they went to Denmark, and from Denmark by sea to Texland. From Texland they went to Westflyland, and so along the coast to Walhalagra. Thence they followed the Zuideren, the Val, till, with great apprehension, they arrived beyond the Rhine at the Marsitan of whom our Apollonia has written. When they had stayed there a little time, they returned to the lowlands. When they had been some time descending towards the lowlands, and had reached about the old citadel of Aachen, 4 of their servants were suddenly murdered and stripped. They had loitered a little behind. My brother, who was always on the alert, had forbidden them to do so, but they did not listen to him. The murderers that had committed this crime were Twisklanders, who had at that time audaciously crossed the Rhine to murder and to steal. The Twisklanders are banished and fugitive children of Freya, but their wives they have stolen from the Tartars. The Tartars are a brown tribe of Findus people, who are thus named because they make war on everybody. They are all horsemen and robbers. This is what makes the Twisklanders so bloodthirsty. The Twisklanders who had done the wicked deed called themselves Phrygian or Franken. There were among them, my brother said, red, brown, and white men. The red and brown made their hair white with lime water, but as their faces remained brown, they were only the more ugly. In the same way as Apollonia, they visited Leidesburg and the Alderga. Afterwards they made a tour of all the neighborhood of Stavra. They behaved with so much amiability, that everywhere the people wished to keep them. 3 months later, Adel sent messengers to all the friends that he had made, requesting them to send to him their wise men in the month of May. His wife, he said, who had been Magd of Texland, had received a copy of it. In Texland many writings are still found which are not copied in the book of the Adelingen. One of these writings had been placed by Gosa with her last will, which was to be opened by the oldest maiden, Albitha, as soon as Friso was dead. Here is the writing with Gosa's advice. When Wralda gave children to the mothers of mankind, he gave one language to every tongue and to all lips. This gift Wralda had bestowed upon men in order that by its means they might make known to each other what must be avoided and what must be followed to find salvation, and to hold salvation to all eternity. Wralda is wise and good, and all-foreseeing. As he knew that happiness and holiness would flee from the earth when wickedness could overcome virtue, he has attached to the language an equitable property. This property consists in this, that men can neither lie nor use deceitful words without stammering or blushing, by which means the innately bad are easily known. As thus our language opens the way to happiness and blessedness, and thus helps to guard against evil inclinations, it is rightly named the language of the gods, and all those by whom it is held in honor derive honor from it. But what has happened? As soon as among our half-brothers and sisters deceivers arose, who gave themselves out as servants of the good, it soon became otherwise. The deceitful priests and the malignant princes, who always clung together, wished to live according to their own inclinations, without regard to the laws of right. In their wickedness they went so far as to invent other languages, so that they might speak secretly in anybody's presence of their wicked and unworthy affairs without betraying themselves by stammering, and without showing a blush upon their countenances. But what has that produced? Just as the seed of good herbs which has been sown by good men in the open day springs up from the ground, so time brings to light the evil seed which has been sown by wicked men in secret and in darkness. The wanton girls and effeminate youths who consorted with the immoral priests and princes, taught the new language to their companions, and thus spread it among the people till God's language was clean forgotten. Would you know what came of all this? How that stammering and blushing no longer betrayed their evil doings, virtue passed away, wisdom and liberty followed, unity was lost, and quarreling took its place. Love flew away, and unchastity and envy met round their tables, and where previously justice reigned, now it is the sword. All are slaves, the subjects of their masters, envy, bad passions, and covetousness. If they had only invented one language things might possibly have still gone on well, but they invented as many languages as there are states, so that one people can no more understand another people than a cow a dog, or a wolf a sheep. The mariners can bear witness to this. From all this it results that all the slave people look upon each other as strangers. And that as a punishment of their inconsiderateness and presumption, they must quarrel and fight till they are all destroyed. Here is my counsel. If you wish that you alone should inherit the earth, you must never allow any language but God's language to pass your lips, and take care that your own language remains free from outlandish sounds. If you wish that some of Lida's children and some of Finda's children remain, you must do the same. The language of the East Skunlanders has been perverted by the vile Magyars, and the language of the followers of Kaltana has been spoiled by the dirty Gauls. Now, we have been weak enough to admit among us the returned followers of Helenia, but I anxiously fear that they will reward our weakness by debasing our pure language. Many things have happened to us, but among all the citadels that have been disturbed and destroyed in the bad time, Bertha has preserved Friasburg uninjured, and I may remark that Frias or God's language has always remained here untainted. Here in Texland, therefore, schools should be established, and from all the states that have kept to the old customs the young people should be sent here, and afterwards those whose education is complete can help those who remain at home. If foreigners come to buy ironwares from you, and want to talk and bargain, they must come back to God's language. If they learn God's language, then the words, to be free, and, to have justice, will come to them, and glimmer and glitter in their brains to a perfect light, and that flame will destroy all bad princes and hypocritical dirty priests. The native and foreign messengers were pleased with that writing, but no schools came from it. Then Adel established schools himself. Every year Adel and Ifja went to inspect the schools. If they found a friendly feeling existing between the natives and foreigners, they were extremely pleased. If there were any who had sworn friendship together, they assembled the people, and with great ceremony let them inscribe their names in a book which was called the Book of Friendship, and afterwards a festival was held. All these customs were kept up in order to bring together the separate branches of Fria's race. But the maidens who were opposed to Adel and Ifja said that they did it for no other reason than to make a name for themselves, and to bring all the other states under their subjection. Among my father's papers I found a letter from Ludgert the Gertman. Omitting some passages which only concern my father, I proceed to relate the rest. Punjab, that is 5 rivers, and by which we travel, is a river of extraordinary beauty, and is called 5 rivers, because 4 other streams flow into the sea by its mouth. Far away to the eastward is another large river, the holy or sacred Ganges. Between these 2 rivers is the land of the Hindus. Both rivers run from the high mountains to the plains. The mountains in which their sources lie are so high that they reach the heavens, Laya, and therefore these mountains are called Himalaya. Among the Hindus and others out of these countries there are people who meet together secretly. They believe that they are pure children of Finda, and that Finda was born in the Himalaya mountains, whence she went with her children to the lowlands. Some of them believe that she, with her children, floated down upon the foam of the Ganges, and that is the reason why the river is called the sacred Ganges. But the priests, who came from another country, traced out these people and had them burnt, so that they do not dare to declare openly their creed. In this country all the priests are fat and rich. In their churches there are all kinds of monstrous images, many of them of gold. To the west of the Punjab are the Iraniers, or Moros, Drangianan, the Gedrasan, Gedrasirs, or runaways, and the Urjetan, or forgotten. These names are given by the priests out of spite, because they fled from their customs and religion. On their arrival our forefathers likewise established themselves to the east of the Punjab, but on account of the priests they likewise went to the west. In that way we learn to know the Uren and other people. The Uren are not savages, but good people, who neither pray to nor tolerate images, neither will they suffer priests or churches, but as we adhere to the light of Fasta, so they everywhere maintain fire in their houses. Coming still further westward, we arrive at the Gedrasan. Regarding the Gedrasan, they have been mixed with other people, and speak a variety of languages. These people are really savage murderers, who always wander about the country on horseback hunting and robbing, and hire themselves as soldiers to the surrounding princes, at whose command they destroy whatever they can reach. The country between the Punjab and the Ganges is as flat as Friesland near the sea, and consists of forests and fields, fertile in every part, but this does not prevent the people from dying by thousands of hunger. The famines, however, must not be attributed to Wralda or Eartha, but to the princes and priests. The Hindus are timid and submissive before their princes, like hinds before wolves. Therefore the Uran and others have called them Hindus, which means hinds. But their timidity is frightfully abused. If strangers come to purchase corn, everything is turned into money, and this is not prevented by the priests, because they, being more crafty and rapacious than all the princes put together, know very well that all the money will come into their pockets. Besides what the people suffer from their princes, they suffer a great deal from poisonous and wild beasts. There are great elephants that sometimes go about in whole flocks and trample down cornfields and whole villages. There are great black and white cats which are called tigers. They are as large as calves, and they devour both men and beasts. Besides other creeping animals there are snakes from the size of a worm to the size of a tree. The largest can swallow a cow, but the smallest are the most deadly. They conceal themselves among the fruits and flowers, and surprise the people who come to gather them. Anyone who is bitten by them is sure to die, as Eartha has given no antidote to their poison, because the people have so given themselves up to idolatry. There are, besides, all sorts of lizards, tortoises, and crocodiles. All these reptiles, like the snakes, vary from the size of a worm to the trunk of a tree. According to their size and fierceness, they have names which I cannot recollect, but the largest are called alligators, because they eat as greedily the putrid cattle that float down the stream as they do living animals that they seize. On the west of the Punjab where we come from, and where I was born, the same fruits and crops grow as on the east side. Formerly there existed also the same crawling animals, but our forefathers burnt all the underwood, and so diligently hunted all the wild animals, that there are scarcely any left. To the extreme west of the Punjab there is found rich clay land as well as barren heaths, which seem endless, occasionally varied lovely spots on which the eye rests enchanted. Among the fruits there are many that I have not found here. Among the various kinds of corn some is as yellow as gold. There are also golden apples, of which some are as sweet as honey and others as sour as vinegar. In our country there are nuts as large as a child's head. They contain cheese and milk. When they are old oil is made from them. Of the husks ropes are made, and of the shells cups and other household utensils are made. I have found in the woods here bramble and holly berries. In my country we have trees bearing berries, as large as your lime trees, the berries of which are much sweeter and 3 times as large as your gooseberries. When the days are at the longest, and the sun is in the zenith, a man's body has no shadow. If you sail very far to the south and look to the east at midday, the sun shines on your left side as it does in other countries on the right side. With this I will finish. It will be easy for you, by means of what I have written, to distinguish between false accounts and true descriptions. Your Loytert. The writing of Beaton. My name is Beaton, son of Hachgana. My uncle, not having married, left no children. I was elected in his place. Adel, the third king of that name, approved of the choice, provided I should acknowledge him as master. In addition to the entire inheritance of my uncle, he gave me some land which joined my inheritance, on condition that I would settle people there who should never his people. Therefore I will allow it a place here. Letter of Rika the Oud Magd, read at Stavern at the Jewel Feast. My greeting to all of you whose forefathers came here with Friso. According to what you say, you are not guilty of idolatry. I will not speak about that now, but will at once mention a failing which is very little better. You know, or you do not know, how many titles Wralda has. But you all know that he is named Universal Provider, because that everything comes and proceeds from him for the sustenance of his creatures. It is true that Eartha is named sometimes the feeder of all, because she brings forth all the fruits and grains on which men and beasts are fed, but she would not bear any fruit or grain unless Wralda gave her the power. Women who nourish their children at their breasts are called nurses, but if Wralda did not give them milk the children would find no advantage, so that, in short, Wralda really is the nourisher. That Eartha should be called the universal nourisher, and that a mother should be called a feeder, one can understand, figuratively speaking, but that a father should be called a feeder, because he is a father, goes against all reason. Now I know whence all this folly comes. Listen to me. It comes from our enemies, and if this is followed up you will become slaves, to the sorrow of Freya and to the punishment of your pride. I will tell you what happened to the slave people. From that you may take warning. The foreign kings, who follow their own will, place Wralda below the crown. From envy that Wralda is called the universal father, they wish also to be called fathers of the people. Now, everybody knows that kings do not regulate the productiveness of the earth, and that they have their sustenance by means of the people, but still they will persist in their arrogance. In order to attain their object they were not satisfied from the beginning with free gifts, but imposed a tax upon the people. With the tax thus raised they hired foreign soldiers, whom they retained about their courts. Afterwards they took as many wives as they pleased, and the smaller princes and gentry did the same. When, in consequence, quarrels and disputes arose in the households, and complaints were made about it, they said every man is the father, feeder, of his household, therefore he shall be master and judge over it. Thus arose arbitrariness, and as the men ruled over their households the kings would do over their people. When the kings had accomplished that, they should be called fathers of the people, they had statues of themselves made, and erected in the churches beside the statues of the idols. And those who would not bow down to them were either killed or put in chains. Your forefathers and the Twisglanders had intercourse with the kings, and learned these follies from them. But it is not only that some of your men have been guilty of stealing titles, I have also much to complain of against your wives. If there are men among you who wish to put themselves on a level with Wralda, there are also women who wish to consider themselves equals of Freya. Because they have borne children, they call themselves mothers. But they forget that Freya bore children without having intercourse with a man. Yes, they not only have desire to rob Freya and the Iramutters of their honorable title, with whom they cannot put themselves upon an equality, but they do the same with the honorable titles of their fellow creatures. There are women who allow themselves to be called ladies, although they know that that only belongs to the wives of princes. They also let their daughters be called Magdan, although they know that no young girls are so called unless they belong to a citadel. You all fancy that you are the better for this name stealing, but you forget that jealousy clings to it, and that every wrong sows the seed of its own rod. If you do not alter your course, in time it will grow so strong that you cannot see what will be the end. Your descendants will be flogged by it, and will not know whence the stripes come. But although you do not build citadels for the maidens and leave them to their fate, there will still remain some who will come out of woods and caves, and will prove to your descendants that you have by your disorderliness been the cause of it. Then you will be damned. Your ghosts will rise frightened out of their graves. They will call upon Oera, Freya, and her maidens, but they shall receive no succor before the jewel shall enter upon a new circuit, and that will only be 3,000 years after this century. The end of Rika's letter. Therefore I will first write about Black Adel. Black Adel was the fourth king after Friso. In his youth he studied first at Texland, and then at Stavern, and afterwards travelled through all the states. When he was 24 years old his father had him elected as Siga Asker. As soon as he became Asker he always took the part of the poor. The rich, he said, do enough of wrong by means of their wealth, therefore we ought to take care that the poor look up to us. By arguments of this kind he became the friend of the poor and the terror of the rich. It was carried so far that his father looked up to him. When his father died he succeeded, and then he wished to retain his office as well, as the kings of the East used to do. The rich would not suffer this, so all the people rose up, and the rich were glad to get out of the assembly with whole skins. From that time there was no more talk of equality. He oppressed the rich and flattered the poor, by whose assistance he succeeded in all his wishes. King Asker, as he was always called, was 7 feet high, and his strength was as remarkable as his height. He had a clear intellect, so that he understood all that was talked about, but in his actions he did not display much wisdom. He had a handsome countenance and a smooth tongue, but his soul was blacker than his hair. When he had been king for a year, he obliged all the young men in the state to come once a year to the camp to have a sham fight. At first he had some trouble with it, but at last it became such a habit that old and young came from all sides to ask if they might take part in it. When he had brought it to this point, he established military schools. The rich complained that their children no longer learned to read and write. Asker paid no attention to it. But shortly afterwards, when a sham fight was held, he mounted a throne and spoke aloud, "The rich have come to complain to me that their boys do not learn to read and write." I answered nothing. But I will now declare my opinion, and let the General Assembly decide. While they all regarded him with curiosity, he said further, "According to my idea, we ought to leave reading and writing at present to the Magdan and wise people. I do not wish to speak ill of our forefathers, I will only say that in the times so vaunted by some, the Burg Magdan introduced disputes into our country, which the mothers were unable, either first or last, to put an end to. Worse still, while they talked and chattered about useless customs the Gauls came and seized all our beautiful southern country. Even at this very time our degenerate brothers and their soldiers have already come over the Scheldt. It therefore remains for us to choose whether we will carry a yoke or a sword. If we wish to be and to remain free, it behoves our young men to leave reading and writing alone for a time. And instead of playing games of swinging and wrestling, they must learn to play with sword and spear. When we are completely prepared, and the boys are big enough to carry helmet and shield and to use their weapons, then, with your help, I will attack the enemy. The Gauls may then record the defeat of their helpers and soldiers upon our fields with the blood that flows from their wounds. When we have once expelled the enemy, then we must follow it up till there are no more Gauls, slaves, or Tartars to be driven out of Freya's inheritance." "That is right," the majority shouted, and the rich did not dare to open their mouths. He must certainly have thought over this address and had it written out, for on the evening of the same day there were copies in at least 20 different hands, and they all sounded the same. Afterwards he ordered the ship people to make double prows, upon which steel crossbows could be fixed. Those who were backward in doing this were fined, and if they swore that they had no means, the rich men of the village were obliged to pay. Now we shall see what resulted from all this bustle. In the north part of Britain there exists a Scotch people, the most of them spring from Freya's blood, some of them are descended from the followers of Cultana, and, for the rest, from Britons and fugitives who gradually, in the course of time, took refuge there from the tin mines. Those who come from the tin mines have wives, either altogether foreign or of foreign descent. They are all under the dominion of the Gauls. Their arms are wooden bows and arrows pointed with stag's horn or flint. Their houses are of turf and straw, and some of them live in caves in the mountains. Sheep that they have stolen form their only wealth. Some of the descendants of Cultana's followers still have iron weapons, which they have inherited from their forefathers. In order to make myself well understood, I must let alone for a while my account of the Scotch people, and write something about the near Crekelanders, Italians. The Crekelanders formerly belonged to us only, but from time immemorial descendants of Lida and Finda have established themselves there. Of these last there came in the end a whole troop from Troy. Troy is the name of a town that the far Crekelanders, Greeks, had taken and destroyed. When the Trojans had nestled themselves among the near Crekelanders, with time and industry they built a strong town with walls and citadels named Rome, that is, spacious. When this was done, the people by craft and force made themselves masters of the whole land. The people who live on the south side of the Mediterranean Sea come for the most part from Phoenicia. The Phoenicians, Puniers or Carthaginians, are a bastard race of the blood of Phrygia, Finda, and Lida. The Lida people were there as slaves, but by the unchastity of the women these black people have degenerated the other people and dyed them brown. These people and the Romans are constantly struggling for the supremacy over the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans, moreover, live at enmity with the Phoenicians. And their priests, who wish to assume the sole government of the world, cannot bear the sight of the Gauls. First they took from the Phoenicians Marseilles, then all the countries lying to the south, the west, and the north, as well as the southern part of Britain, and they have always driven away the Phoenician priests, that is the Gauls, of whom thousands have sought refuge in North Britain. A short time ago the chief of the Gauls was established in the citadel, which is called Karnak, that is the corner, whence he issued his commands to the Gauls. All their gold was likewise collected there. Hern, chosen corner, or Karnak, is a stone citadel which did belong to Calta. Therefore the maidens of the descendants of Caltana's followers wished to have the citadel again. Thus through the enmity of the maidens and the Gauls, hatred and quarreling spread ever the mountain country with fire and sword. Our sea people often came there to get wool, which they paid for with prepared hides and linen. Asker had often gone with them, and had secretly made friendship with the maidens and some princes, and bound himself to drive the Gauls out of Karnak. When he came back there again he gave to the princes and the fighting men iron helmets and steel bows. War had come with him, and soon blood was streaming down the slopes of the mountains. When Asker thought a favorable opportunity occurred, he went with 40 ships and took Karnak and the chief of the Gauls, with all his gold. The people with whom he fought against the soldiers of the Gauls, he had enticed out of the Saxon market by promises of much booty and plunder. Thus nothing was left to the Gauls. After that he took 2 islands for stations for his ships, from which he used later to sally forth and plunder all the Phoenician ships and towns that he could reach. When he returned he brought nearly 600 of the finest youths of the Scotch mountaineers with him. He said that they had been given him as hostages, that he might be sure that the parents would remain faithful to him, but this was untrue. He kept them as a bodyguard at his court, where they had daily lessons in riding and in the use of all kinds of arms. The Denmarkers, who proudly considered themselves sea warriors above all the other sea people, no sooner heard of the glorious deeds of Asker, than they became jealous of him to such a degree that they would bring war over the sea and over his lands. See here, then, how he was able to avoid a war. Among the ruins of the destroyed citadel of Stavia there was still established a clever burgmagd, with a few maidens. Her name was Rientia, and she was famed for her wisdom. This maid offered her assistance to Asker, on condition that he should afterwards rebuild the citadel of Stavia. When he had bound himself to do this, Rientia went with 3 maidens to Holstein. She traveled by night, and by day she made speeches in all the markets and in all the assemblies. Alda, she said, had told her by his thunder that all the Frias people must become friends, and united as brothers and sisters, otherwise Finda's people would come and sweep them off the face of the earth. After the thunder Fria's 7 watch maidens appeared to her in a dream 7 nights in succession. They had said, disaster hovers over Fria's land with yoke and chains. Therefore all the people who have sprung from Fria's blood must do away with their surnames, and only call themselves Fria's children, or Fria's people. They must all rise up and drive Finda's people out of Fria's inheritance. If you will not do that, you will bring the slave chains round your necks, and the foreign chiefs will ill-treat your children and flog them till the blood streams into your graves. Then shall the spirits of your forefathers appear to you, and reproach your cowardice and thoughtlessness. The stupid people who, by the acts of the Magyars, were already so much accustomed to folly, believed all that she said, and the mothers clasped their children to their bosoms. When Rientia had brought the king of Holstein and the others to an agreement, she sent messengers to Asker, and went herself along the Baltic Sea. From there she went to the Litauers, face-hewers, so called because they always strike at their enemy's face. The Litauers are fugitives and banished people of our own race, who wander about in the Twisklanden. Their wives have been mostly stolen from the Tartars. The Tartars are a branch of Finda's race, and are thus named by the Twisklanders because they never will be at peace, but provoke people to fight. She proceeded on beyond the Saxenmarken, crossing through the other Twisklanders in order always to repeat the same thing. After 2 years had passed, she came along the Rhine home. Among the Twisklanders she gave herself out for a mother, and said that they might return as free and true people, but then they must go over the Rhine and drive the Gauls out of Fria's south lands. If they did that, then her king Asker would go over the Scheldt and win back the land. Among the Twisklanders many bad customs of the Tartars and Magyars have crept in, but likewise many of our laws have remained. Therefore they still have Magden, who teach the children and advise the old. In the beginning they were opposed to Rientia, but at last she was followed, obeyed, and praised by them where it was useful or necessary. Representation of a ship with forecastle and poop deck, preserved on an old seal of Stavern. As soon as Asker heard from Rientia's messengers how the Jutlanders were disposed, he immediately, on his side, sent messengers to the king of Huls. The ship in which the messengers went was laden with women's ornaments, and took also a golden shield on which Asker's portrait was artistically represented. These messengers were to ask the king's daughter, Frethegundsta, in marriage for Asker. Frethegundsta came a year after that to Stavern. Among her followers was a Magi, for the Jutlanders had been long ago corrupted. Soon after Asker had married Frethegundsta, a church was built at Stavern. In the church were placed monstrous images, bedecked with gold-woven dresses. It is also said that Asker, by night, and at unseasonable times, kneeled to them with Frethegundsta, but one thing is certain, the citadel of Stavia was never rebuilt. Rientia was already come back, and went angrily to Protlick the mother, at Texland, to complain. Protlick sent out messengers in all directions, who proclaimed that Asker is gone over to idolatry. Asker took no notice of this, but unexpectedly a fleet arrived from Huls. In the night the maidens were driven out of the citadel, and in the morning there was nothing to be seen of the citadel but a glowing heap of rubbish. Protlick and Rientia came to me for shelter. When I reflected upon it, I thought that it might prove bad for my state. Therefore, we hit upon a plan which might serve us all. This is the way we went to work. In the middle of the Crichilwood, to the east of Liadward, lies our place of refuge, which can only be reached by a concealed path. A long time ago I had established a garrison of young men who all hated Asker, and kept away all other people. Now it was come to such a pitch among us, that many women, and even men, talked about ghosts, white women, and gnomes, just like the Denmarkers. Asker had made use of all these follies for his own advantage, and we wished to do the same. One dark night I brought the Magden to the citadel, and afterwards they went with their serving maids dressed in white along the path, so that nobody dare go there any more. When Asker thought he had his hands free, he let the Magyars travel through his states under all kinds of names, and, except in my state, they were not turned away anywhere. After that Asker had become so connected with the Jutlanders and the Denmarkers, they all went roving together, but it produced no real good to them. They brought all sorts of foreign treasures home, and just for that reason the young men would learn no trades, nor work in the fields, so at last he was obliged to take slaves. But that was altogether contrary to Wralda's wish and to Freya's counsel. Therefore the punishment was sure to follow it. This is the way in which the punishment came. They had altogether taken a whole fleet that came out of the Mediterranean Sea. This fleet was laden with purple cloths and other valuables that came from Phoenicia. The weak people of the fleet were put ashore south of the Seine, but the strong people were kept to serve as slaves. The handsomest were retained ashore, and the ugly and black were kept on board ship as rowers. In the fly the plunder was divided, but, without their knowing it, they divided the punishment too. Of those who were placed in the foreign ships 6 died of colic. It was thought that the food and drink were poisoned, so it was all thrown overboard, but the colic remained all the same. Wherever the slaves or the goods came, there it came too. The Saxonmen took it over to their marches. The Jutlanders brought it to Skunland and along the coasts of the Baltic Sea, and with Asker's mariners it was taken to Britain. We and the people of Greniga did not allow either the people or the goods to come over our boundaries, and therefore we remained free from it. How many people were carried off by this disease I cannot tell. But Prodlik, who heard it afterwards from the maidens, told me that Asker had helped out of his states 1,000 times more free men than he had brought dirty slaves in. When the pest had ceased, the Twisklanders who had become free came to the Rhine, but Asker would not put himself on an equality with the princes of that vile degenerate race. He would not suffer them to call themselves Freya's children, as Riencha had offered them, but he forgot then that he himself had black hair. Among the Twisklanders there were 2 tribes who did not call themselves Twisklanders. One came from the far southeast, and called themselves Alamanen. They had given themselves this name when they had no women among them, and were wandering as exiles in the forests. Later on they stole women from the slave people like the Litauers, but they kept their name. The other tribe, that wandered about in the neighborhood, called themselves Franks, not because they were free, but the name of their first king was Frank, who, by the help of the degenerate maidens, had himself made hereditary king over his people. The people nearest to him called themselves Tiav, his sons, that is, sons of the people. They had remained free, because they never would acknowledge any king, or prince, or master except those chosen by general consent in a general assembly. Asker had already learned from Riencha that the Twisklander princes were almost always at war with each other. He proposed to them that they should choose a duke from his people, because, as he said, he was afraid that they would quarrel among themselves for the supremacy. He said also that his princes could speak with the Gauls. This, he said, was also the opinion of the mother. Then the princes of the Twisklanders came together, and after 21 days they chose Auric as duke. Auric was Asker's nephew. He gave him 200 Scotch and 100 of the greatest Saxmannen to go with him as a bodyguard. The princes were to send 21 of their sons as hostages for their fidelity. Thus far all had gone according to his wishes. But when they were to go over the Rhine, the king of the Franks would not be under Auric's command. Thereupon all was confusion. Asker, who thought that all was going on well, landed with his ships on the other side of the Scheldt. But there they were already aware of his coming, and were on their guard. He had to flee as quickly as he had come, and was himself taken prisoner. The Gauls did not know whom they had taken, so he was afterwards exchanged for a noble Gaul whom Asker's people had taken with them. While all this was going on, the Magyars went about audaciously over the lands of our neighbors. Near Igmuda, where formerly the citadel Forana had stood, they built a church larger and richer than that which Asker had built at Stavern. They said afterwards that Asker had lost the battle against the Gauls, because the people did not believe that Woden could help them, and therefore they would not pray to him. They went about stealing young children, whom they kept and brought up in the mysteries of their abominable doctrines. Were there people who... Here the manuscript ends abruptly. Adela. Ak min svn. Thissa boka moti myth lif and seal warja. Save befatteth jus gednais von versus ele folk ak von vsa eflem. Validen jahabik tam utier flod fred talik myth t and thin remoter. The hja waren wet reden, their thrvch gungan hja afterni verdarva. Veen hja nav to verlisa hab ikravp relandisk pampier skreven. Sa huersa Thursday se erv, mot who seak rescriva. Thin barn also tilth ju hja nimmerthway nav eni kma. Skreven til juert. Nei atlansken ken is that 3000 pure hundred and jugen and fjordigostje, that is nei kirsten renong that 1200 sex and 50gostje. Hita tabinamath orath linda dot, whack. Uljawa noma. VMB VSA Uljawa Ethlas will and VMB VSA Uljawa Fridams will, thus Anwara SA bidik to Joe. Okuljawa and let the Agon NS Papecap tach nimmerth over thissa scripta any wager. Ja spreketh sweda worda, men ja torneth and marksam and Alice what fawn versus Fryas treft. Veen Rika prebend to winnend SA heleth ja myth the Papa Kenningar. Thissa wethath that why jara greatest viand ascend. Thurf dam why jara lyoda to spreek thra vr frijdom, reject and forced and plicht. Thurv letteth ja Alice verdeligja, what fawn VSA Eflem KVMT and what their jita rest fawn VSA aldecidum. Okuljawa ik have by tam hove west. Will WR. Alda teeth gelda and willeth y versus nav sterik and imakja ja skyland versus algader verdeligja. Skreven til judward. Act 103 nei kirsten begrip. Liko tonamath o vira linda. 3449-1256 is 2193 before Christ. That bok thera Adela Folstar. Thridich after a day that the folksmoderum brocht was thrvch ding vrest magi stand et or arg vm2. Alles data der Litza anda or side der Usara, wherein von versus Aufkirth and Venderiti weld des Maggie Kiemen, net stand to verzane, that er weldig skoldworth of VREDL land. Veen dat vluk to wherein had a man mina act Bilitsen, where Gajarath wherein a Lara Manalik, der an god rop stand by the famna. The nei that Amar verlapen wherein as thrjv at Melda, was al gored and the tys and al nsa by Jarek feast. The to the lest of Freya Adela that word, Andy Keth. J ala wed et that ik thrjv jaburchvam weezen sy. AK wit j that ik karen sy to motor, and AK, that ik nen motor nessa nath nilda, thurf damik apal to min engachurd. Thatch what j nath meet, that is, that ik alabert nisa nagnjen ha, even as ik en rent like folksmotter weezen were. Ik have Alan Fawn and Witherfaren to shand waterberda. Der thrvch send my fellow Sika bar ruden, der ora nath meet. J hath jester seeth, that VSA Siba and the ora sid der Rosara njvt and laugh were. The ik may setsa to JV, that er magi se nen ein ga of one and hate thrvch that weld singer weapon, men blat thrvch archels to drinka, and jitamar thrvch that jirich sa thera hertigam and thera ethelinga. Freya hate sate y any skolden nen freya ljvd by versus Tolita, the what haven't ja den. Ja haven't VSA if jand any I falged, wand instead fon jaraf and senum to d-and, jefta fry to litain, haven't ja fryas red minute and se to jaris lafona maked. Turf dam ja sock deaden, mocked Freya navt longer waka over jam, ja haven in as others frydom binaman, and that is seek, that ja jara adjan valeran hall. Thatch that ella is Joe Selva Aiken. Menik will setsa to Joe, ho ja nei gradum sa leg vrswell th send. Therafinum jara weeva krajon barn. Thissa waxton pa myth vsa frya barn. Altomet tvilden and jolden ja to samni pa hem, jeftha ja werin myth ekram by their herd. Der herden ja myth lustum nei the verdwalska finasagam, thurf dam ja thjvd and nei werin. Sa sent ja ventfrighten thongsteen wald jara aldrum. As the barn grat radon and sagan that the finare barn and weapon teramat, and blat worka most, the krajon ja aneth worka en grins and radon hard hatchfran. The baza and jara storstus num krupton by the lotteriga fina mangertum. And jara adjun tagatera thrvch that vel farbled fane way brocht, letten jara selva begorda thrvch the scanesta finanapa, jara vel aldrum to spot. The veen magi that anda nos kryg, the nama the scanesta signer fina and magyara verlovend ra ky myth golden horna, sa ja ra thrvch versus folk fatadeten, after them sina lurf breda. Men sin ljuda deden mar, burn radon to sok makad, nei salandum wybrocht, and sawersech jav brocht werin and sin of lawler, then radon ja to bex and don. The skinslavona vsa tal moktik werin, the clividon ja the hertoga and ethelinga and board, and kethan, ja most tundin magi herik wortha, sa kundan jaris num faljatam, oni thrvc folk karen to redain. Therather veen go to dedum and fardal torre hus kryan hudavalovaden ja von sinant wegum jita and afterdel beach, hoka tam and far and afterdel kryan hudasiden ja and rondeltu, and tam and rondel huda and elstat. Wherein the ethla to hard fryas, the wenden ja the stuin and hilden par verbasterus vnamen. Jesterdai wherein among jo tam alit folk to hoppa hropa wild.
Welcome to the Cox Speed Spectacular, home of America's fastest download speeds.
Connection between these two. There is wanting, at least, the arrival of the invited, and an account of what passed at their meeting. It is clear, therefore, that the copyist must have turned over 2 pages of the original instead of 1. There certainly existed then an earlier manuscript, and that was doubtless written by Lico Oera Linda in the year 803. But if instead of going to the count a man accuses another behind his back, he must be put on the pillory in the marketplace, and then sent out of the country, but not to the tin mines, because even there a backbiter is to be feared. 3. If any man should prove a traitor and show to our enemies the paths leading to our places of refuge, or creep into them by night, he must be the offspring of Finda, he must be burnt. The sailors must take his mother and all his relations to a desolate island, and there scatter his ashes, in order that no poisonous herbs may spring from them. The maidens must curse his name in all the states, in order that no child may be called by his name, and that his ancestors may repudiate him. War had come to an end, but famine came in its place. There were 3 men who each stole a sack of corn from different owners, but they were all caught. The first owner brought his thief to the judge, and the maiden said everywhere that he had done right. The second owner took the corn away from his thief and let him go in peace. The maiden said he has done well. The third owner went to the thief's house, and when he saw what misery was there, he went and brought a wagon load of necessaries to relieve their distress. Freya's maidens came around him and wrote his deed in the eternal book, and wiped out all his sins. This was reported to the Ira Mutter, and she had it made known over the whole country. What is written hereunder is inscribed on the walls of Warburg. See plate I. What appears at the top is the signs of the jewel, that is, the first symbol of Wralda, also of the origin or beginning from which time is derived. This is the croter, which must always go round with the jewel. According to this model Freya formed the set hand which she used to write her Texas. When Fasta was Ira Mutter she made a running hand out of it. The Witkening, that is, the Sea King Godfried the Old, made separate numbers for the set hand and for the runic hand. It is therefore not too much that we celebrate it once a year. We may be eternally thankful to Wralda that he allowed his spirit to exercise such an influence over our forefathers. In her time Finda also invented a mode of writing, but that was so high-flown and full of flourishes that her descendants have soon lost the meaning of it. Afterwards they learned our writing, that is, the Finns, the Thyriers, and the Krekelanders, but they did not know that it was taken from the jewel, and must therefore always be written round like the sun. Furthermore, they wished that their writing should be illegible by other people, because they always had matters to conceal. In doing this they acted very unwisely, because their children could only with great difficulty read the writings of their predecessors, whereas our most ancient writings are as easy to read as those that were written yesterday. Here is a specimen of the set hand and of the running hand, as well as of the figures, in both. See Plate 2. This stands inscribed upon all citadels. Before the bad time came our country was the most beautiful in the world. The sun rose higher, and there was seldom frost. The trees and shrubs produced various fruits, which are now lost. In the fields we had not only barley, oats, and rye, but wheat which shone like gold, and which could be baked in the sun's rays. The years were not counted, for one was as happy as another. On one side we were bounded by Oera sea, on which no one but us might or could sail. On the other side we were hedged in by the broad Twiskland, Tuschenland, Dutchland, through which the Finda people dared not come on account of the thick forests and the wild beasts. Eastward our boundary went to the extremity of the East Sea, and westward to the Mediterranean Sea. So that besides the small rivers we had 12 large rivers given us by Oera to keep our land moist, and to show our seafaring men the way to the sea. The banks of these rivers were at one time entirely inhabited by our people, as well as the banks of the Rhine from one end to the other. Opposite Denmark and Jutland we had colonies and a Bergmagd. Thence we obtained copper and iron, as well as tar and pitch, and some other necessaries. Opposite to us we had Britain, formerly Westland, with her tin mines. Britain was the land of the exiles, who with the help of their Bergmagd had gone away to save their lives. But in order that they might not come back they were tattooed with AB on the forehead, the banished with a red dye, the other criminals with blue. Moreover, our sailors and merchants had many factories among the distant Krekelanders and in Lydia. In Lydia, Libya, the people are black. As our country was so great and extensive, we had many different names. Those who were settled to the east of Denmark were called Jutland, because often they did nothing else than look for amber, Jutland, on the shore. Those who lived in the islands were called Letten, because they lived an isolated life. All those who lived between Denmark and the Sandval, now the Skelt, were called Sturleden, pilots, zeekampers, naval men, and Angelaren, fishermen. The Angelaren were men who fished in the sea, and were so named because they used lines and hooks instead of nets. From there to the nearest part of Krekeland the inhabitants were called Katamers, because they never went to sea but remained ashore. Those who were settled in the higher marches bounded by Twisklanden, Germany, were called Saxmannen, because they were always armed against the wild beasts and the savage Britons. Besides these we had the names Landzaten, natives of the land, Marzaten, natives of the fens, and Wood or Houtzaten, natives of the woods. How the bad time came. During the whole summer the sun had been hid behind the clouds, as if unwilling to look upon the earth. There was perpetual calm, and the damp mist hung like a wet sail over the houses and the marshes. The air was heavy and oppressive, and in men's hearts was neither joy nor cheerfulness. In the midst of this stillness the earth began to tremble as if she was dying. The mountains opened to vomit forth fire and flames. Some sank into the bosom of the earth, and in other places mountains rose out of the plain. Aldland, called by the seafaring people, Atland, disappeared, and the wild waves rose so high over hill and dale that everything was buried in the sea. Many people were swallowed up by the earth, and others who had escaped the fire perished in the water. It was not only in Finda's land that the earth vomited fire, but also in Twiskland, Germany.
Freedom. Freedom is why I love doing apartment deals, just like the one you're seeing on the screen now. And the good news, man, I'm not special. When you meet me, you'll understand that. You probably already understand that. My word, look at my hair. It's an absolute mess, okay? Anybody can do this. And I'm hosting a 90-minute masterclass in your area to prove that to you. You know, in a span of 4 years, I've went from $0 to $100 million of deals, which is a crazy number to me, man. A number that I never even thought about. And that's how I was able to fulfill my wife's dream to move our family here to Maui. And I'm very grateful for that. Today's a perfect example of freedom too. You know, we have some friends in town. Everybody wanted to go on a full day excursion. So let's go. Let's make it happen. You know, the cash flow comes in while I'm out here, and I don't have to go grind in an office or, you know, ask and beg for a last minute vacation day. You know, if we want to live in Maui, we can do that too. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for that. And that, my friends, is that's why I love being involved in apartment deals. You know, if you want to learn how to do these deals with us, I have a free event, a free training essentially coming up near you. I now have money to fund deals, and I like to have people like you help me find them. You know, it allows me to do more. So feel free to check out the 90-minute masterclass coming up. And if you decide you want to be in these kind of deals, we're really there. You can decide if you do want to be involved in those deals. And my goal is to give you real value at the event, whether you decide to participate or not. You know, if apartment deals interest you, or if being free interests you, this is a very pointed question. Then follow the link below and bring your spouse, a friend, whoever you'd like, okay?
Whole forests were burned one after the other, and when the wind blew from that quarter our land was covered with ashes. Rivers changed their course, and at their mouths new islands were formed of sand and drift. During 3 years this continued, but at length it ceased, and forests became visible. Many countries were submerged, and in other places land rose above the sea, and the wood was destroyed through the half of Twiskland, Germany. Troops of Finda's people came and settled in the empty places. Our dispersed people were exterminated or made slaves. Then watchfulness was doubly impressed upon us, and time taught us that union is force. This is inscribed on the Warburg by the Aldegamute. The Warburg is not a maiden city, but the place where all the foreign articles brought by sailors were stored. It lies 3 hours south from Mediasplik. Thus is the preface. Hills, bow your heads, weep, ye streams and clouds. Yes. Skunland, Scandinavia, blushes, an enslaved people tramples on your garment, O Freya. This is the history. 101 years after the submersion of Aldland a people came out of the east. That people was driven by another. Behind us, in Twistland, Germany, they fell into disputes, divided into 2 parties, and each went its own way. Of the one no account has come to us, but the other came in the back of our Skunland, which was thinly inhabited, particularly the upper part. Therefore they were able to take possession of it without contest, and as they did no other harm, we would not make war about it. Now that we have learned to know them, we will describe their customs, and after that how matters went between us. They were not wild people, like most of Finda's race, but, like the Egyptians, they have priests and also statues in their churches. The priests are the only rulers, they call themselves Magyars, and their headman Magi. He is high priest and king in one. The rest of the people are of no account, and in subjection to them. This people have not even a name. But we call them Finns, because although all the festivals are melancholy and bloody, they are so formal that we are inferior to them in that respect. But still they are not to be envied, because they are slaves to their priests, and still more to their creeds. They believe that evil spirits abound everywhere, and enter into men and beasts, but of Wralda's spirit they know nothing. They have weapons of stone, the Magyars of copper. The Magyars affirm that they can exorcise and recall the evil spirits, and this frightens the people, so that you never see a cheerful face. When they were well established, the Magyars sought our friendship, they praised our language and customs, our cattle and iron weapons, which they would willingly have exchanged for their gold and silver ornaments. And they always kept their people within their own boundaries, and that outwitted our watchfulness. 80 years afterwards, just at the time of the Jol feast, they overran our country like a snowstorm driven by the wind. All who could not flee away were killed. Freya was appealed to, but the Skunlanders, Scandinavians, had neglected her advice. Then all the forces were assembled, and 3 hours from Godesberg they were withstood, but war continued. Kat or Katrine was the name of the priestess who was Bergmagd of Godesberg. Kat was proud and haughty, and would neither seek counsel nor aid from the mother, but when the Bergthiren, citizens, knew this, they themselves sent messengers to Texland to the Iramutter. Minna, this was the name of the mother, summoned all the sailors and the young men from Oestflyland and Denmark. From this expedition the history of Woden sprang, which is inscribed on the citadels, and is here copied. At Aldergamute there lived an old sea king whose name was Sterik, and whose deeds were famous. This old fellow had 3 nephews. Woden, the eldest, lived at Lumkamakia, near the Enyud, in Oestflyland, with his parents. He had once commanded troops. Tunis and Inca were naval warriors, and were just then staying with their father at Aldergamute. When the young warriors had assembled together, they chose Woden to be their leader or king, and the naval force chose Tunis for their sea king and Inca for their admiral. The navy then sailed to Denmark, where they took on board Woden and his valiant host. The wind was fair, so they arrived immediately in Skunland. When the northern brothers met together, Woden divided his powerful army into 3 bodies. Freya was their war cry, and they drove back the Finns and Magyars like children. When the Magi heard how his forces had been utterly defeated, he sent messengers with truncheon and crown, who said to Woden, O almighty king, we are guilty, but all that we have done was done from necessity. You think that we attacked your brothers out of ill will, but we were driven out by our enemies, who are still at our heels. We have often asked your Bergmagd for help, but she took no notice of us. The Magi says that if we kill half our numbers in fighting with each other, then the wild shepherds will come and kill all the rest. The Magi possesses great riches, but he has seen that Freya is much more powerful than all our spirits together. He will lay down his head in her lap. You are the most warlike king on the earth, and your people are of iron. Become our king, and we will all be your slaves. What glory it would be for you if you could drive back the savages. Our trumpets would resound with your praises, and the fame of your deeds would precede you everywhere. Woden was strong, fierce, and warlike, but he was not clear-sighted, therefore he was taken in their toils, and crowned by the Magi. Very many of the sailors and soldiers to whom this proceeding was displeasing went away secretly, taking Kat with them. But Kat, who did not wish to appear before either the mother or the general assembly, jumped overboard. Then a storm arose and drove the ships upon the banks of Denmark, with the total destruction of their crews. This strait was afterwards called the Kattegat. When Woden was crowned, he attacked the savages, who were all horsemen, and fell upon Woden's troops like a hailstorm, but like a whirlwind they were turned back, and did not dare to appear again. When Woden returned, Magi gave him his daughter to wife. Whereupon he was incensed with herbs. But they were magic herbs, and by degrees he became so audacious that he dared to disavow and ridicule the spirits of Freya and Wralda, while he bent his free head before the false and deceitful images. His reign lasted 7 years, and then he disappeared. The Magi said that he was taken up by their gods and still reigned over us, but our people laughed at what they said. When Woden had disappeared some time, disputes arose. We wished to choose another king, but the Magi would not permit it. He asserted that it was his right given him by his idols. But besides this dispute there was one between the Magyars and Finns, who would honor neither Freya nor Woden. But the Magi did just as he pleased, because his daughter had a son by Woden, and he would have it that this son was of high descent. While all were disputing and quarreling, he crowned the boy as king, and set up himself as guardian and counselor. Those who cared more for themselves than for justice let him work his own way, but the good men took their departure. Many Magyars fled back with their troops, and the sea people took ship, accompanied by a body of stalwart Finns as rowers. Next comes upon the stage the history of Neef Tunis and Neef Inca. All this is inscribed on the Warburg, but also on the Berg Stavia, which lies behind the port of Stavra. When Tunis wished to return home, he went first towards Denmark. But he might not land there, for so the mother had ordered, nor was he to land at Flyland nor anywhere about there. In this way he would have lost all his people by want and hardship, so he landed at night to steal and sailed on by day. Thus coasting along, he at length arrived at the colony of Cadiz, so called because it was built with a stone quay. Here they bought all kinds of stores, but Tuncha the Bergmagd would not allow them to settle there. When they were ready they began to disagree.
Most people have no clue that in 2023 the best way to make money on Amazon is not with physical.
Tunis wished to sail through the straits to the Mediterranean Sea, and enter the service of the rich Egyptian king, as he had done before, but Inca said he had had enough of all those Findus people. Inca thought that perchance some high-lying part of Atland might remain as an island, where he and his people might live in peace. As the two cousins could not agree, Tunis planted a red flag on the shore, and Inca a blue flag. Every man could choose which he pleased, and to their astonishment the greater part of the Finns and Magyars followed Inca, who had objected to serve the kings of Findus people. When they had counted the people and divided the ships accordingly, the fleet separated. We shall hear of Tunis afterwards, but nothing more of Inca. Neef Tunis coasted through the straits to the Mediterranean Sea. When Atland was submerged there was much suffering also on the shores of the Mediterranean, on which account many of Findus people, Krekelanders, and people from Lyda's land, came to us. On the other hand, many of our people went to Lyda's land. The result of all this was that the Krekelanders far and wide were lost to the superintendence of the mother. Tunis had reckoned on this, and had therefore wished to find there a good haven from which he might go and serve under the rich princes. But as his fleet and his people had such a shattered appearance, the inhabitants on the coast thought that they were pirates, and drove them away. At last they arrived at the Phoenician coast, 193 years after Atland was submerged. Near the coast they found an island with 2 deep bays, so that there appeared to be 3 islands. In the middle one they established themselves, and afterwards built a city wall round the place. Then they wanted to give it a name, but disagreed about it. Some wanted to call it Friasberg, others Neeftunia. But the Magyars and Finns begged that it might be called Thyrisberg. Thyr was the name of one of their idols, and it was upon his feast day that they had landed there, and in return they offered to recognize Tunis as their perpetual king. Tunis let himself be persuaded, and the others would not make any quarrel about it. When they were well established, they sent some old seamen and Magyars on an expedition as far as the town of Sidon. But at first the inhabitants of the coast would have nothing to do with them, saying, "You are only foreign adventurers whom we do not respect." But when we sold them some of our iron weapons, everything went well. They also wished to buy our amber, and their inquiries about it were incessant. But Tunis, who was far-seeing, pretended that he had no more iron weapons or amber. Then merchants came and begged him to let them have 20 vessels, which they would freight with the finest goods, and they would provide as many people to row as he would require. 12 ships were then laden with wine, honey, tanned leather, and saddles and bridles mounted in gold, such as had never been seen before. Tunis sailed to the Flymere with all this treasure, which so enchanted the Grevitman of West Flyland that he induced Tunis to build a warehouse at the mouth of the Flymere. Afterwards this place was called Almanaland, and the market where they traded at Weiringen was called Tolatmarkt. The mother advised that they should sell everything except iron weapons, but no attention was paid to what she said. As the Thyriers had thus free play, they came from far and near to take away our goods, to the loss of our seafaring people. Therefore it was resolved in a general assembly to allow only 7 Therian ships and no more in a year. What the consequence of this was? In the northernmost part of the Mediterranean there lies an island close to the coast. They now came and asked to buy that, on which a general council was held. The mother's advice was asked, and she wished to see them at some distance, so she saw no harm in it, but as we afterwards saw what a mistake we had made, we called the island Massalia, Marseilles. Hereafter will be seen what reason we had. The Gaulen, as the missionary priests of Sidon were called, had observed that the land there was thinly peopled, and was far from the mother. In order to make a favorable impression, they had themselves called in our language followers of the truth. But they had better have been called abstainers from the truth, or, in short, Triowenden, as our seafaring people afterwards called them. When they were well established, their merchants exchanged their beautiful copper weapons and all sorts of jewels for our iron weapons and hides of wild beasts, which were abundant in our southern countries. But the Gaulen celebrated all sorts of vile and monstrous festivals, which the inhabitants of the coast promoted with their wanton women and sweet poisonous wine. If any of our people had so conducted himself that his life was in danger, the Gaulen afforded him a refuge, and sent him to Phoenicia, that is, Pomland. When he was settled there, they made him write to his family, friends, and connections that the country was so good and the people so happy that no one could form any idea of it. In Britain there were plenty of men, but few women. When the Gaulen knew this, they carried off girls everywhere and gave them to the Britons for nothing. So all these girls served their purpose to steal children from Wralda in order to give them to false gods. Now we will write about the war between the Bergmagd and Calta and Minerva. And how we thereby lost all our southern lands and Britain to the Gaulen. Near the southern mouth of the Rhine and the Scheldt there are 7 islands, named after Freya's 7 virgins of the week. In the middle of one island is the city of Walhalagara, Middelburg, and on the walls of this city the following history is inscribed. Above it are the words, read, learn, and watch. 563 years after the submersion of Atlan, that is, 1,600 years before Christ, a wise town priestess presided here, whose name was Minerva, called by the sailors Nihilenia. This name was well chosen, for her counsels were new and clear above all others. On the other side of the Scheldt, at Flyburg, Sigrid presided. This maiden was full of tricks. Her face was beautiful, and her tongue was nimble. But the advice that she gave was always conveyed in mysterious terms. Therefore the mariners called her Calta, and the landsmen thought it was a title. In the last will of the dead mother, Rosamond was named first, Minerva second, and Sigrid third in succession. Minerva did not mind that, but Sigrid was very much offended. Like a foreign princess, she wished to be honored, feared, and worshipped, but Minerva only desired to be loved. At last all the sailors, even from Denmark and Flymere, did homage to her. This hurt Sigrid, because she wanted to excel Minerva. In order to give an impression of her great watchfulness, she had a cock put on her banner. So then Minerva went and put a sheepdog and an owl on her banner. The dog, she said, guards his master and his flock, and the owl watches that the mice shall not devastate the fields, but the cock in his lewdness and his pride is only fit to murder his nearest relations. When Calta found that her scheme had failed she was still more vexed, so she secretly sent for the Magyars to teach her conjuring. When she had had enough of this she threw herself into the hands of the Gauls. But all her malpractices did not improve her position. When she saw that the sailors kept more and more aloof from her, she tried to win them back by fear. At the full moon, when the sea was stormy, she ran over the wild waves, calling to the sailors that they would all be lost if they did not worship her. Then she blinded their eyes, so that they mistook land for water and water for land, and in this way many a good ship was totally lost. At the first war feast, when all her countrymen were armed, she brought casks of beer, which she had drugged. When they were all drunk she mounted her war horse, leaning her head upon her spear. Sunrise could not be more beautiful. When she saw that the eyes of all were fixed upon her, she opened her lips and said, "Sons and daughters of Phrygia, you know that in these last times we have suffered much loss and misery because the sailors no longer come to buy our paper. But you do not know what the reason of it is. I have long kept silence about it, but can do so no longer. Listen, then, my friends, that you may know on which side to show your teeth. On the other side of the Scheldt, where from time to time there come ships from all parts, they make now paper from pumpkin leaves, by which they save flax and outdo us. Now, as the making of paper was always our principal industry, the mother willed that people should learn it from us, but Minerva has bewitched all the people, yes, bewitched, my friends, as well as all our cattle that died lately. I must come out with it. If I were not Bergmagd, I should know what to do. I should burn the witch in her nest." As soon as she had uttered these words she sped away to her citadel. But the drunken people were so excited that they did not stop to weigh what they had heard. In mad haste they hurried over the sandfall, and as night came on they burst into the citadel. However, Calta again missed her aim. For Minerva, her maidens, and her lamp were all saved by the alertness of the seamen. We now come to the history of John. John, Johann, Jan, are all the same name, though the pronunciation varies, as the seamen like to shorten everything to be able to make it easier to call. John, that is, Gibbon, was a sea king, born at Alberga, who sailed from the Flymere with a fleet of 127 ships fitted out for a long voyage, and laden with amber, tin, copper, cloth, linen, felt, otter skins, beaver and rabbit skins. He would also have taken paper from here, but when he saw how Calta had destroyed the citadel he became so angry that he went off with all his people to Flyburg, and out of revenge set fire to it. His admiral and some of his people saved the lamp and the maidens, but they could not catch Sigrid, or Calta. She climbed up on the furthest battlement, and they thought she must be killed in the flames, but what happened? While all her people stood transfixed with horror, she appeared upon her steed more beautiful than ever, calling to them, to Calta. Then the other Skelda people poured out towards her. When the seamen saw that, they shouted, "We are for Minerva," from which arose a war in which thousands were killed. At this time Rosamond the mother, who had done all in her power by gentle means to preserve peace, when she saw how bad it was, made short work of it. Immediately she sent messengers throughout all the districts to call a general levy, which brought together all the defenders of the country. The landsmen who were fighting were all caught, but John with his seamen took refuge on board his fleet, taking with him the 2 lamps, as well as Minerva and the maidens of both the citadels. Helprik, the chief, summoned him to appear. But while all the soldiers were on the other side of the Scheldt, John sailed back to the Flymere, and then straight to our islands. His fighting men and many of our people took women and children on board, and when John saw that he and his people would be punished for their misdeeds, he secretly took his departure. He did well, for all our islanders, and the other Scheldt people who had been fighting were transported to Britain. This step was a mistake, for now came the beginning of the end. Calta, who, people said, could go as easily on the water as on the land, went to the mainland and on to Massalia, Marseilles. Then came the Gauls out of the Mediterranean Sea with their ships to Cadiz, and along all our coasts, and fell upon Britain, but they could not make any good footing there, because the government was powerful and the exiles were still Frisians. But now came Calta and said, "You were born free, and for small offences have been sent away, not for your own improvement, but to get tin by your labor. If you wish to be free again, and take my advice, and live under my care, come away. I will provide you with arms, and will watch over you." The news flew through the land like lightning, and before the carrier's wheel had made one revolution she was mistress of all the thyriers in all our southern states as far as the Seine. She built herself a citadel on the high land to the north, and called it Kaltisburg. It still exists under the name of Karanak. From this castle she ruled as a true mother, against their will, not for her followers, but over them, who were thenceforth called Celts. The Gauls gradually obtained dominion over the whole of Britain, partly because they no longer had any citadel. Secondly, because they had there no Bergmagden, and thirdly, because they had no real lamps. From all these causes the people could not learn anything. They were stupid and foolish, and having allowed the Gauls to rob them of their arms, they were led about like a bull with a ring in his nose. Now we shall write how it fared with John. It is inscribed at Texland. 10 years after John went away, there arrived 3 ships in the Flymere. The people cried huzzah. What a blessing, and from their accounts the mother had this written. When John reached the Mediterranean Sea, the reports of the Gauls had preceded him, so that on the nearest Italian coast he was nowhere safe. Therefore he went with his fleet straight over to Libya. There the black men wanted to catch them and eat them. At last there, keep clear, for here the air has been long poisoned by the priests. The king was a descendant of Tunis, as we were afterwards informed. But as the priests wished to have a king, who, according to their ideas, was of long descent, they deified Tunis, to the vexation of his followers. After they had passed Tyre, the Tyrians seized one of the rearmost ships, and as the ship was too far behind us, we could not take it back again, but John swore to be revenged for it. When night came, John bent his course towards the distant Crecolandum. At last they arrived at a country that looked very barren, but they found a harbor there. Here, said Minerva, we need not perhaps have any fear of princes or priests, as they always look out for rich fat lands. There was not room for all the ships, and yet most of the people were too cowardly to go any further. Then John, who wished to get away, went with his spear and banner, calling to the young people, to know who would volunteer to share his adventures. Minerva did the same thing, but she wished to remain there. The greater part stopped with Minerva, but the young sailors went with John. John took the lamp of Calta and her maidens with him. Minerva retained her lamp and her own maidens. Between the Near and this John found some islands, which he thought desirable. Upon the largest he built a city in the wood between the mountains. From the smaller islands he made expeditions for vengeance on the Tyrians and their lands. Therefore these islands were called Insulae Piritarum, as well as Johannes Insulae. When Minerva had examined the country which is called by the inhabitants Attica, she saw that the people were all goatherds, and that they lived on meat, wild roots, herbs, and they were clothed in skins, and had their dwellings on the slopes, Helinga, of the hills, wherefore they were called Hellingers. At first they ran away, but when they found that we did not attack them, they came back and showed great friendship. Minerva asked if we might settle there peaceably. This was agreed to on the condition that we should help them to fight against their neighbors, who came continually to carry away their children and to rob their dwellings. Then we built a citadel at an hour's distance from the harbor. By the advice of Minerva it was called Athens, because, she said, those who come after us ought to know that we are not here by cunning or violence, but were received as friends, Atha. While we were building the citadel the principal personages came to see us, and when they saw that we had no slaves stand it, as they thought that she was a princess. But Minerva said, how did you get your slaves? They answered, we bought some and took others in war. Minerva replied, if nobody would buy slaves they would not steal your children. And you would have no wars about it. If you wish to remain our allies, you will free your slaves. The chiefs did not like this, and wanted to drive us away, but the most enlightened of the people came and helped us to build our citadel, which was built of stone. This is the history of John and of Minerva. When they had finished their story they asked respectfully for iron weapons, for, said they, our foes are powerful, but if we have good arms we can withstand them. When this had been agreed to, the people asked if Phrygia's customs would flourish in Athens and in other parts of Greece. But if they do not descend from Phrygia, then there will be a long contention about it, because the carrier must make 5,000 revolutions of his jewel before Finda's people will be ripe for liberty. This is about the Kirkmen. When Helenia or Minerva died, the priests pretended to be with us, and in order to make it appear so, they deified Helenia. They refused to have any other mother chosen, saying that they feared there was no one among her maidens whom they could trust as they had trusted Minerva, surnamed Helenia. But we would not recognize Minerva as a goddess, because she herself had told us that no one could be perfectly good except the spirit of Wralda. Therefore we chose Geert Pyre's daughter for our mother. When the priests saw that they could not fry their herrings on our fire, have everything their own way, they left Athens, and said that we refused to acknowledge Minerva as a goddess out of envy, because she had shown so much affection to the natives. Thereupon they gave the people statues of her, declaring that they might ask of them whatever they liked, as long as they were obedient to her. By these kinds of tales the stupid people were estranged from us, and at last they attacked us. But as we had built our stone city wall with 2 horns down to the sea, they could not get at us. Then, lo and behold, an Egyptian high priest, bright of eye, clear of brain, and enlightened of mind, whose name was Cecrops, came to give them advice. When he saw that with his people he could not storm our wall, he sent messengers to Tyre. Thereupon there arrived 300 ships full of wild mountain soldiers, which sailed unexpectedly into our haven while we were defending the walls. When they had taken our harbor, the wild soldiers wanted to plunder the village and our ships. One had already ravished a girl, but Cecrops would not permit it. And the Tyrian sailors, who still had Frisian blood in their veins, said, if you do that we will burn our ships, and you shall never see your mountains again. Cecrops, who had no inclination towards murder or devastation, sent messengers to Geert, requiring her to give up the citadel, offering her free exit with all her live and dead property, and her followers the same. The wisest of the citizens, seeing that they could not hold the citadel, advised Geert to accept at once, before Cecrops became furious and changed his mind. 3 months afterwards Geert departed with the best of Phrygia's sons, and 7 times 12 ships. Soon after they had left the harbor they fell in with at least 30 ships coming from Tyre with women and children. They were on their way to Athens, but when they heard how things stood there they went with Geert. The sea king of the Tyrians brought them all together through the strait which at that time ran into the Red Sea, now re-established as the Suez Canal. At last they landed at the Punjab, called in our language the 5 rivers, because 5 rivers flow together to the sea. Here they settled, and called it Geertmania. The king of Tyre afterwards, seeing that all his best sailors were gone, sent all his ships with his wild soldiers to catch them, dead or alive. When they arrived at the strait, both the sea and the earth trembled. The land was upheaved so that all the water ran out of the strait, and the muddy shores were raised up like a rampart. This happened on account of the virtues of the Gertman, as everyone can plainly understand. In the year 1005 after Atlant was submerged, this was inscribed on the eastern wall of Friesburg. After 12 years had elapsed without our seeing any Italians in Almanland, there came 3 ships, finer than any that we possessed or had ever seen. On the largest of them was a king of the Jonatian Islands whose name was Ulysses, the fame of whose wisdom was great. To him a priestess had prophesied that he should become the king of all Italy provided he could obtain a lamp that had been lighted at the lamp in Texland. For this purpose he had brought great treasures with him, above all, jewels for women more beautiful than had ever been seen before. They were from Troy, a town that the Greeks had taken. All these treasures he offered to the mother, but the mother would have nothing to do with them. At last, when he found that there was nothing to be got from her, he went to Walhalagara, Walcheren. There was established a Bergmagd whose name was Cot, but who was commonly called Callip, because her lower lip stuck out like a masthead. Here he tarried for years, to the scandal of all that knew it. According to the report of the maidens, he obtained a lamp from her, but it did him no good, because when he got to sea his ship was lost, and he was taken up naked and destitute by another ship. There was left behind by this king a writer of pure Friar's blood, born in the new harbour of Athens, who wrote for us what follows about Athens. From which may be seen how truly the mother Helic spoke when she said that the customs of Phria could never take firm hold in Athens. From the other Greeks you will have heard a great deal of bad about Cecrops, because he was not in good repute, but I dare affirm that he was very renowned both among the inhabitants and among us, for he was against oppression, unlike the other priests, and was virtuous, and knew how to value the wisdom of distant nations. Knowing that, he permitted us to live according to our own Oedipus. There was a story current that he was favorable to us because he was the son of a Frisian girl and an Egyptian priest. The reason of this was that he had blue eyes, and that many of our girls had been stolen and sold to Egypt. But he never confirmed this. However it may have been, certain it is that he showed us more friendship than all the other priests together. When he died, his successors soon began to tear up our charters, and gradually to enact so many unsuitable statutes that at long last nothing remained of liberty but the shadow and the name. Besides, they would not allow the laws to be written, so that the knowledge of them was hidden from us. Formerly all the cases in Athens were pleaded in our language, but afterwards in both languages, and at last in the native language only. At first the men of Athens only married women of our own race, but the young men as they grew up with the girls of the country took them to wife. The bastard children of this connection were the handsomest and cleverest in the world. But they were likewise the wickedest, wavering between the two parties, paying no regard to laws or customs except where they suited their own interests. As long as a ray of Phria's spirit existed, all the building materials were for common use, and no one might build a house larger or better than his neighbors. But when some degenerate townspeople got rich by sea voyages and by the silver that their slaves got in the silver countries, they went to live out on the hills or in the valleys. There, behind high enclosures of trees or walls, they built palaces with costly furniture, and in order to remain in good odor with the nasty priests, they placed their likenesses of false gods and unchaste statues. Sometimes the dirty priests and princes wished for the boys rather than the girls, and often led them astray from the paths of virtue by rich presents or by force. Because riches were more valued by this lost and degenerate race than virtue or honor, one sometimes saw boys dressed in splendid flowing robes, to the disgrace of their parents and maidens, and to the shame of their own sex. If our simple parents came to a general assembly at Athens and made complaints, a cry was raised, "Here, here! There is a sea monster going to speak." Such as Athens become, like a morass in a tropical country full of leeches, toads, and poisonous snakes, in which no man of decent habits can set his foot. This is inscribed in all our citadels. How our Denmark was lost to us 1,602 years after the submersion of Atlant. Through the mad wantonness of Woden, Maggie had become master of the east part of Scandinavia. They dare not come over the hills and over the sea. The mother would not prevent it. She said, "I see no danger in their weapons, but much in taking the Scandinavians back again, because..." So, the General Assembly were of the same opinion. Therefore it was left to him. A good 100 years ago Denmark began to trade. They gave their iron weapons in exchange for gold ornaments, as well as for copper and iron ore. The mother sent messengers to advise them to have nothing to do with this trade. There was danger to their morals in it, and if they lost their morals they would soon lose their liberty. But the Denmarkers paid no attention to her. They did not believe that they could lose their morals, therefore they would not listen to her. At last they were at a loss themselves for weapons and necessaries, and this difficulty was their punishment. Brilliantly adorned, but their cupboards and their sheds were empty. Just 100 years after the first ship with provisions sailed from the coast, poverty and want made their appearance, hunger spread her wings all over the country, dissension marched proudly about the streets and into the houses. Charity found no place, and unity departed. The child asked its mother for food, she had no food to give, only jewels. The women applied to their husbands, the husbands appealed to the counts had nothing to give, or if they had, they hid it away. Now the jewels must be sold, but while the sailors were away for that purpose, the frost came and laid a plank upon the sea and the strait, the Sound. When the frost had made the bridge, vigilance ceased in the land, and treachery took its place. Instead of watching on the shores, they put their horses in their sledges and drove off to Scandinavia. Then the Scandinavians, who hungered after the land of their forefathers, came to Denmark. One bright night they all came. Now, they said, we have a right to the land of our fathers, and while they were fighting about it, the Finns came to the defenseless villages and ran away with the children. As they had no good weapons, they lost the battle, and with it their freedom, and Maggie became master. All this was the consequence of their not reading Freya's text and neglecting her counsels. There are some who think that they were betrayed by the counts, and that the maidens had long suspected it, but if anyone attempted to speak about it, his mouth was shut by golden chains. We can express no opinion about it, we can only say to you, do not trust too much to the wisdom of your princes or of your maidens, but if you wish to keep things straight, everybody must watch over his own passions, as well as the general welfare. 2 years afterwards Magi himself came with a fleet of light boats to steal the lamp from the mother of Texland. This wicked deed he accomplished one stormy winter night, while the wind roared and the hail rattled against the windows. The watchman on the tower, hearing the noise, lighted his torch. As soon as the light from the tower fell upon the bastion, he saw that already armed men had got over the wall. He immediately gave the alarm, but it was too late. Before the guard was ready, there were 2,000 people battering the gate. The struggle did not last long. As the guard had not kept a good watch, they were overwhelmed. While the fight was going on, a rascally Finn stole into the chamber of the mother, and would have done her violence. She resisted him, and threw him down against the wall. When he got up, he ran his sword through her. If you will not have me, you shall have my sword. A Danish soldier came behind him and clave his head in two. There came from it a stream of black blood and a wreath of blue flame. The Magi had the mother nursed on his own ship. As soon as she was well enough to speak clearly, the Magi told her that she must sail with him, but that she should keep her lamp and her maidens, and should hold a station higher than she had ever done before. Moreover, he said that he should ask her, in presence of all his chief men, if he would become the ruler of all the country and people of Freya, that she must declare and affirm this, or he would let her die a painful death. Then, when he had gathered all his chiefs around her bed, he asked, in a loud voice, Frana, since you are a prophetess, shall I become ruler over all the lands and people of Freya? Frana did as if she took no notice of him. But at last she opened her lips and said, my eyes are dim, but the other light dawns upon my soul. Yes, I see it. Hear, Bertha, and rejoice with me. At the time of the submersion of Atland, the first spoke of the jewel stood at the top. After that it went down, and our freedom with it. When 2 spokes, or 2,000 years, shall have rolled down, the sons shall arise who have been bred of the fornication of the princes and priests with the people, and shall witness against their fathers. They shall all fall by murder, but what they have proclaimed shall endure, and shall bear fruit in the bosoms of able men, like good seed which is laid in thy lap. Yet 1,000 years shall the spoke descend, and sink deeper in darkness, and in the blood shed over you by the wickedness of the princes and priests. After that, the dawn shall begin to glow. When they perceive this, the false princes and priests will strive and wrestle against freedom, but freedom, love, and unity will take the people under their protection, and rise out of the vile pool. The light which at first only glimmered shall gradually become a flame. The blood of the bad shall flow over your surface, but you must not absorb it. At last the poisoned animals shall eat it, and die of it. All the stories that have been written in praise of the princes and priests shall be committed to the flames. Thenceforth your children shall live in peace. When she had finished speaking she sank down. The Magi, who had not understood her, shrieked out, I have asked you if I should become master of all the lands and people of Freya, and now you have been speaking to another. Frana raised herself up, stared at him, and said, before 7 days have passed your soul shall haunt the tombs with the night birds, and your body shall be at the bottom of the sea. Very good, said the Magi, swelling with rage. Say that I am coming. Then he said to his executioners, throw this woman overboard. This was the end of the last of the mothers. We do not ask for revenge. Time will provide that, but 1,000 times we will call with Freya, watch. 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 How it fared.
God damn, that was cold-blooded. So, I don't know if you guys, there's like a couple people here. I know this audiobook expedition. Might be the greatest in the casino here. Got some background noise. Just try to adjust that, reduce. All right. So, God damn. All right. Yeah, Shaylin the book, right? But dude, did you hear this? So there's a mother, which is a very respected woman in this culture, right? Like top of the food chain, but it's just under the man though, right? The male, the god is Veralda, which is male, right? And males, they run it, but like the women have special powers. Like this one has like clairvoyance or something, right? to where this magi, which you could look at it like our current rulers, right? The way they would use craft, like you could say like Freemasonry or something, just the way dark magic type stuff, you know, so the magi magic. So this guy, the leader, the king or whatever of the magi, goes to the woman, to the clairvoyant woman of the Phrygian people, right? And he asks if he's going to be leader, if he's going to be king of everybody, and he gathers everyone around, like trying to like almost intimidate her. So she tells a story, right, that he doesn't really get. She tells a story about how things are going to go down over like thousands of years, and then he presses her like, well, what about me ruling all your people? And she's like, in 7 days, dude, we got to go back to what she said. Dude, that was cold-blooded. Hold up.
Afterwards with the Magi did that, but Ethners, throw this woman overboard. Very good, said the maid at him, and said, before 7 days have passed your soul shall haunt the tombs with the night birds, and your body shall be at the bottom of the sea.
Damn. So it's this woman with this king and all his men around her as they got her like in a precarious position. Just lays the truth on him, just regardless of the consequences. It's so fucking like courageous and just fierce. Just awesome, dude. Before 7 days had passed. And so what do they say?
Very good, said the Magi.
Very good, he says, as he's swelling with rage. He tells his executioners to throw her overboard. It's crazy.
Swelling with rage. Say that I am coming. Then he said to his executioners, throw this woman overboard. This was the end of the last of the mothers. We do not ask for revenge. Time will provide that, but 1,000,000 times we will call with Freya. Watch. 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 How it fared afterwards with the Magi. After the murder of the mother, he brought the lamp and the maidens into his own ship, together with all the booty that he chose. Afterwards he went up the Flymere because he wished to take the maiden of Mediasplik or Stavern and install her as mother, but there they were on their guard. The seafaring men of Stavern and Eldurga would gladly have gone to John, but the great fleet was out on a distant voyage, so they proceeded in their small fleet to Mediasplik, and kept themselves concealed in a sheltered place behind trees. The Magi approached Mediasplik in broad daylight, nevertheless, his men boldly stormed the citadel. But as they landed from the boats, our people sallied forth from the creek, and shot their arrows with balls of burning turpentine upon the fleet.
There's an Oera show. But the kicker in that show is the dragon who's supposed to bring the new world, Lucifer, is a man. Dragon. Something to this magic and woman being naturally inclined to woman. Yeah, that's where like the stereotype of witches comes from, maybe. Yeah, because this dude, like, obviously her opinion meant a lot to him, right? She told him the truth. Yeah, the dragon's interesting. I don't know what, and a lot of this stuff too is like the metaphor of it. Through the alchemical process, you hear all these things like the dragon. I wonder what the dragon is in alchemy, you know what I mean? It's all intertwined with that, the alchemical spiritual ascension process.
They were so well aimed that many of the ships were instantly on fire. Those left to guard the ships shot at us, but they could not reach us. When at last a burning ship drifted towards the ship of the Magi, he ordered the man at the helm to sheer off, but this man was the Dane who had cleft the head of the fin. He said, "You sent our Iramutter to the bottom of the sea to say that you were coming. In the bustle of the fight you might forget it, now I will take care that you keep your word." The Magi tried to push him off, but the sailor, a real Frisian and strong as an ox, clutched his head with both hands, and pitched him into the surging billows. Then he hoisted up his brown shield, and sailed straight to our fleet. Thus the maidens came unhurt to us, but the lamp was extinguished, and no one knew how that had happened. When those on the uninjured ships heard that the Magi was drowned, they sailed away, because their crews were Danes. When the fleet was far enough off, our sailors turned and shot their burning arrows at the Finns. When the Finns saw that, and found that they were betrayed, they fell into confusion, and lost all discipline and order. At this moment the garrison sallied forth from the citadel. Those who resisted were killed, and those who fled found their death in the marshes of the Kreilinger wood. Postscript. When the sailors were in the creek, there was a wag from Stavern among them, who said, Medea may well laugh if we rescue her from her citadel. Upon this, the maidens gave to the creek the name Medea Mylakia, Lake of Medea. The occurrences that happened after this everybody can remember. The maidens ought to relate it in their own way, and have it well inscribed. We consider that our task is fulfilled. Hail! The end of the book. The writings of Adelbrast and Apollonia.
Yeah, that's dope, man. I don't even got my own physical copy of it. Look at the goddess Medea. Let's check her out. Yeah. It's a stupid movie, dude. That's hilarious, though. That's what they do. You go to look up a goddess. Right, spell it. Is a sorceress, but also a witch, and is often depicted as a priestess, the goddess of Hecate. Hades? Yeah, the Medea, isn't that Starbucks? Who is the Starbucks siren? It's the siren. She's not a real person. Oh, Starbucks answer. Let's see, Reddit. I hate the Starbucks logo. The Roman goddess, the bear Libertas. Medea. I wanted to study Medea, but I don't understand something. Let's go back. Yeah, Wikipedia kind of sucks that it's a normal go-to first thing, but if you're just trying to get some initial information. Yeah, they're out there. Medea, you can't spell O'Shea. You can't spell Medea without O'Shea. Role of helper maiden, aiding Jason in his search for the golden fleece by using her magic to save his life, killing her brother to allow him to escape. Once he has finished his quest, she abandons her native home of Colchis and flees westwards with Jason. They eventually settle in Cornwall and marry. For 10 years, married Jason intends to abandon her to wed. All right, so what's the gist with this chick? Magic, witchery. I gotcha. Let's get back to it. I'll try to start this at
buying anything online. Don't spend another dime on Amazon until you watch this.
Forefathers, his kinsmen shall no longer wear it, in order that every man may look after the value of liberty. For she said, without sin, Hugh Indian Warren Gatton. Endi de wilde deer seek it die in Hulla Bame, because we dare to speak to their people of liberty, right? Byhield have Endi Biwar also lang so barn JVN Jane. JY and Solera Manatan Jim Vandera to perish. In order not to learn the history of all our people. Translated by J.G.O. Adela. Och, my son. You must preserve these books with body and soul. They contain the history of all our people, as well as of our forefathers. Last year I saved them in the flood, as well as you and your mother, but they got wet, and therefore began to perish. In order not to lose them, I copied them on foreign paper. In case you inherit them, you must copy them likewise, and your children must do so too, so that they may never be lost. Written at Lourdes, in the 3449th year after Atlant was submerged, that is, according to the Christian reckoning, the year 1256. Hitto, surnamed Over de Linda. Watch. Beloved successors, for the sake of our dear forefathers, and of our dear liberty, I entreat you 1,000 times never let the eye of a monk look on these writings. They are very insinuating, but they destroy in an underhand manner all that relates to us Frisians. In order to gain rich benefices, they conspire with foreign kings, who know that we are their greatest enemies, because we dare to speak to their people of liberty, rights, and the duties of princes. Therefore they seek to destroy all that we derive from our forefathers, and all that is left of our old customs. Ah, my beloved ones! I have visited their courts. If W.R. Alda permits it, and we do not shew ourselves strong to resist, they will altogether exterminate us. Lico, surnamed Over de Linda. Written at Ludwart. Anno Domini 803. The Book of Adela's Followers. 30 years after the day on which the Volksmotor was murdered by the Commander Maggie, was a time of great distress. All the states that lie on the other side of the Weser had been wrested from us, and had fallen under the power of Maggie, and it looked as if his power was to become supreme over the whole land. To avert this misfortune a general assembly of the people was summoned, which was attended by all the men who stood in good repute with the Magdan, priestesses. Then at the end of 3 days the whole council was in confusion, and in the same position as when they came together. Thereupon Adela demanded to be heard, and said, "You all know that I was 3 years Burgmagd. You know also that I was chosen for Volksmotor, and that I refused to be Volksmotor because I wished to marry Apol, but what you do not know is, that I have watched everything that has happened, as if I had really been your Volksmotor. I have constantly traveled about, observing what was going on. By that means I have become acquainted with many things that others do not know. You said yesterday that our relatives on the other side of the Weser were dull and cowardly. But I may tell you that the Maggie has not won a single village from them by force of arms, but only by detestable deceit, and still more by the rapacity of their dukes and nobles. Freya has said we must not admit amongst us any but free people. But what have they done? They have imitated our enemies, and instead of killing their prisoners, or letting them go free, they have despised the counsel of Freya, and have made slaves of them. Because they have acted thus, Freya cared no longer to watch over them. They robbed others of their freedom, and therefore lost their own. This is well known to you, but I will tell you how they came to sink so low. The Finn women had children. These grew up with our free children. They played and gambled together in the fields, and were also together by the hearth. There they learned with pleasure the loose ways of the Finns, because they were bad and new. And thus they became denationalized in spite of the efforts of their parents. When the children grew up, and saw that the children of the Finns handled no weapons, and scarcely worked, they took a distaste for work, and became proud. The principal men and their cleverest sons made up to the wanton daughters of the Finns, and their own daughters, led astray by this bad example, allowed themselves to be beguiled by the handsome young Finns in derision of their depraved fathers. When the Maggie found this out, he took the handsomest of his Finns and Magyars, and promised them red cows with golden horns, to let themselves be taken prisoners by our people in order to spread his doctrines. His people did even more. Children disappeared, were taken away to the uplands, and after they had been brought up in his pernicious doctrines, were sent back. When these pretended prisoners had learned our language, they persuaded the dukes and nobles that they should become subject to the Maggie, that then their sons would succeed to them without having to be elected.
My teeth are jacked there in the back.
Those who by their good deeds had gained a piece of land in front of their house, they promised on their side should receive in addition a piece behind. Those who had got a piece before and behind, should have a rondel, complete circuit. And those who had a rondel should have a whole freehold. If the seniors were true to Freya, then they changed their course, and turned to the degenerate sons. Yesterday there were among you those who would have called the whole people together, to compel the eastern states to return to their duty. According to my humble opinion, they would have made a great mistake. Suppose that there was a very serious epidemic among the cattle, would you run the risk of sending your own healthy cattle among the sick ones? Certainly not. Every one must see that doing that would turn out very badly for the whole of the cattle. Who, then, would be so imprudent as to send their children among a people wholly depraved? If I were to give you any advice, it would be to choose a new Volksmotor. I know that you are in a difficulty about it, because out of the 13 Burgmagden that we still have remaining, 8 are candidates for the dignity, but I should pay no attention to that. Tunsha, the Burgmagd of Mediasplik, who is not a candidate, is a person of knowledge and sound sense, and quite as attached to our people and our customs as all the rest together. I should farther recommend that you should visit all the citadels, and write down all the laws of Freya's texts, as well as all the histories, and all that is written on the walls, in order that it may not be destroyed with the citadels. It stands written that every folksmoter and every birkmag shall have assistants and messengers, 21 maidens and 7 apprentices. If I might add more, I would recommend that all the respectable girls in the towns should be taught. For I say positively, and time will show it, that if you wish to remain true children of Freya, never to be vanquished by fraud or arms, you must take care to bring up your daughters as true Freya's daughters. You must teach the children how great our country has been, what great men our forefathers were, how great we still are, if we compare ourselves to others. You must tell them of the sea heroes, of their mighty deeds and distant voyages. All these stories must be told by the fireside and in the field, wherever it may be, in times of joy or sorrow. And if you wish to impress it on the brains and the hearts of your sons, you must let it flow through the lips of your wives and your daughters. Adela's advice was followed. These are the gravetmen under whose direction this book is composed. Apol, Adela's husband, 3 times a sea king, gravetman of Ostflyland and Lindorden. The towns Ludgarda, Lindehem, and Stavia are under his care. The Saxman Storo, Sisha's husband, gravetman over the Hoogfennen and Wouden. 9 times he was chosen as Duke or Heerman, commander. The towns Buda and Managardaforda are under his care. Abello, Jaltia's husband. Gravetman over the Zuiderflylanden. He was 3 times Heerman. The towns Aiken, Liedberg, and Katzberg are under his care. Enoch, Diuk's husband, gravetman over Westflyland and Texel. He was chosen 9 times for sea king. Warburg, Mediasplik, Forana, and Friasberg are under his care. Fop, Dunra's husband, gravetman over the 7 islands. He was 5 times sea king. The town Walhalagara is under his care. This was inscribed upon the walls of Friasberg in Texland, as well as at Stavia and Mediasplik. It was Freya's day, and 7 times 7 years had elapsed since Festa was appointed folksmoter by the desire of Freya. The citadel of Mediasplik was ready, and a birkmagd was chosen. Festa was about to light her new lamp, and when she had done so in the presence of all the people, Freya called from her watchstar, so that everyone could hear it, Festa, take your style and write the things, that I may not speak. Festa did as she was bid, and thus we became Freya's children, and our earliest history began. This is our earliest history. W.R. Alda, who alone is eternal and good, made the beginning. Then commenced time. Time wrought all things, even the earth. The earth bore grass, herbs, and trees, all useful and all noxious animals. All that is good and useful she brought forth by day, and all that is bad and injurious by night. After the 12th Julfeast she brought forth 3 maidens. Lida out of fierce heat. Finda out of strong heat. Freya out of moderate heat. When the last came into existence, W.R. Alda breathed his spirit upon her in order that men might be bound to him. As soon as they were full grown they took pleasure and delight in the visions of W.R. Alda. Hatred found its way among them. They each bore 12 sons and 12 daughters, at every Jule time a couple.
My name is Tyler Devereaux. I'm inviting you to attend my brand new 2-hour live masterclass, and I'm about to show you what 99%.
Thence come all mankind. Lida was black, with hair curled like a lamb's, her eyes shone like stars, and shot out glances like those of a bird of prey. Lida was acute. She could hear a snake glide, and could smell a fish in the water. Lida was strong and nimble. She could bend a large tree, yet when she walked she did not bruise a flower stalk. Lida was violent. Her voice was loud, and when she screamed in anger every creature quailed. Wonderful Lida. She had no regard for laws, her actions were governed by her passions. To help the weak she would kill the strong, and when she had done it she would weep by their bodies. Poor Lida. She turned grave by her mad behavior, and at last she died heartbroken by the wickedness of her children. Foolish children. They accused each other of their mother's death. They howled and fought like wolves, and while they did this the birds devoured the corpse. Who can refrain from tears at such a recital? Finda was yellow, and her hair was like the mane of a horse. She could not bend a tree, but where Lida killed 1 lion she killed 10. Finda was seductive. Her voice was sweeter than any bird's. Her eyes were alluring and enticing, but whoever looked upon them became her slave. Finda was unreasonable. She wrote thousands of laws, but she never obeyed one. She despised the frankness of the good, and gave herself up to flatterers. That was her misfortune. Her head was too full, but her heart was too vain. She loved nobody but herself, and she wished that all should love her. False Finda. Honey sweet were her words, but those who trusted them found sorrow at hand. Selfish Finda. She wished to rule everybody, and her sons were like her. They made their sisters serve them, and they slew each other for the mastery. Treacherous Finda. One wrong word would irritate her, and the cruelest deeds did not affect her. If she saw a lizard swallow a spider, she shuddered. But if she saw her children kill a Frisian, her bosom swelled with pleasure. Unfortunate Finda. She died in the bloom of her age, and the mode of her death is unknown. Hypocritical children. Her corpse was buried under a costly stone, pompous inscriptions were written on it, and loud lamentations were heard at it, but in private not a tear was shed. Despicable people. The laws that Finda established were written on golden tables, but the object for which they were made was never attained. The good laws were abolished, and selfishness instituted bad ones in their place. O Finda! Then the earth overflowed with blood, and your children were mown down like grass. Yes, Finda. Those were the fruits of your vanity. Look down from your watchstar and weep. Freya was white like the snow at sunrise, and the blue of her eyes vied with the rainbow. Beautiful Freya. Like the rays of the sun shone the locks of her hair, which were as fine as spiders' webs. Clever Freya. When she opened her lips the birds ceased to sing and the leaves to quiver. Powerful Freya. At the glance of her eye the lion lay down at her feet and the adder withheld his poison. Pure Freya. Her food was honey, and her beverage was dew gathered from the cups of the flowers. Sensible Freya. The first lesson that she taught her children was self-control, and the second was the love of virtue. And when they were grown she taught them the value of liberty, for she said, without liberty all other virtues serve to make you slaves, and to disgrace your origin. Generous Freya. She never allowed metal to be dug from the earth for her own benefit, but when she did it was for the general use. Most happy Freya. Like the starry host in the firmament, her children clustered around her. Wise Freya. When she had seen her children reach the 7th generation, she summoned them all to Flyland, and there gave them her texts, saying, let this be your guide, and it can never go ill with you. Exalted Freya. When she had thus spoken the earth shook like the sea of Wralda. The ground of Flyland sunk beneath her feet, the air was dimmed by tears, and when they looked for their mother she was already risen to her watching star. Then at length thunder burst from the clouds, and the lightning rode upon the firmament, watch. Far-seeing Freya. The land from which she had risen was now a stream, and except her text all that was in it was overwhelmed. Obedient children.
If you want to prepare for the gas shortages in winter and save big on energy bills, then you need to hear this. This new space heater warms any room in less than 5 minutes while using 90% less energy. This ingenious college student from Germany just fixed the energy crisis with a device that rapidly warms homes for barely a dime. Marcus and a few of his classmates designed the invention for their final thesis project.
When they came to themselves again, they made this high mound and built this citadel upon it, and on the walls they wrote the text, and that everyone should be able to find it they called the land about it Texland. Therefore it shall remain as long as the earth shall be the earth. Freya's text. Prosperity awaits the free. At last they shall see me again. Through him only can I recognize as free who is neither a slave to another nor to himself. This is my counsel. 1. When in dire distress, and when mental and physical energy avail nothing, then have recourse to the spirit of Wralda. But do not appeal to him before you have tried all other means, for I tell you beforehand, and time will prove its truth, that those who give way to discouragement sink under their burdens. 2. To Wralda's spirit only shall you bend the knee in gratitude, thricefold, for what you have received, for what you do receive, and for the hope of aid in time of need. 3. You have seen how speedily I have come to your assistance. Do likewise to your neighbor, but wait not for his entreaties. The suffering would curse you, my maidens would erase your name from the book, and I would regard you as a stranger. 4. Let not your neighbor express his thanks to you on bended knee, which is only due to Wralda's spirit. Envy would assail you, wisdom would ridicule you, and my maidens would accuse you of irreverence. 5. 4 things are given for your enjoyment, air, water, land, and fire, but Wralda is the sole possessor of them. Therefore my counsel to you is, choose upright men who will fairly divide the labor and the fruits, so that no man shall be exempt from work or from the duty of defense. 6. If ever it should happen that one of your people should sell his freedom, he is not of you, he is a bastard. I counsel you to expel him and his mother from the land. Repeat this to your children morning, noon, and night, till they think of it in their dreams. 7. If any man shall deprive another, even his debtor, of his liberty, let him be to you as a vile slave. And I advise you to burn his body and that of his mother in an open place, and bury them 50 feet below the ground, so that no grass shall grow upon them. It would poison your cattle. 8. Meddle not with the people of Lida, nor of Finda, because Wralda would help them, and any injury that you inflicted on them would recoil upon your own heads. 9. If it should happen that they come to you for advice or assistance, then it behoves you to help them, but if they should rob you, then fall upon them with fire and sword. 10. If any of them should seek a daughter of yours to wife, and she is willing, explain to her her folly, but if she will follow her lover, let her go in peace. 11. If your son wishes for a daughter of theirs, do the same as to your daughter. But let not either one or the other ever return among you, for they would introduce foreign morals and customs, and if these were accepted by you, I could no longer watch over you. 12. Upon my servant Fasta I have placed all my hopes. Therefore you must choose her for Iramutter. Follow my advice, then she will hereafter remain my servant as well as all the sacred maidens who succeed her. Then shall the lamp which I have lighted for you never be extinguished. Its brightness shall always illuminate your intellect, and you shall always remain as free from foreign domination as your fresh river water is distinct from the salt sea. This has Fasta spoken. All the regulations which have existed a century, that is, 100 years, may by the advice of the Iramutter, with the consent of the community, be inscribed upon the walls of the citadel, and when inscribed on the walls they become laws. And it is our duty to respect them all. If by force or necessity any regulations should be imposed upon us at variance with our laws and customs, we must submit, but should we be released, we must always return to our own again. That is Freya's will, and must be that of all her children. Fasta said. Anything that any man commences, whatever it may be, on the day appointed for Freya's worship shall eternally fail, for time has proved that she was right. And it is become a law that no man shall, except from absolute necessity, keep that day otherwise than as a joyful feast. These are the laws established for the government of the citadels. 1. Whenever a citadel is built, the lamp belonging to it must be lighted at the original lamp in Texland, and that can only be done by the mother. 2. Every mother shall appoint her own maidens. She may even choose those who are mothers in other towns. 3. The mother of Texland may appoint her own successor, but should she die without having done so, the election shall take place at a general assembly of the whole nation. 4. The mother of Texland may have 21 maidens and 7 assistants, so that there may always be 7 to attend the lamp day and night. She may have the same number of maidens who are mothers in other towns. 5. If a maiden wishes to marry, she must announce it to the mother, and immediately resign her office, before her passion shall have polluted the light. 6. For the service of the mother and of each of the burgh maidens there shall be appointed 21 townsmen, 7 civilians of mature years, 7 warriors of mature years, and 7 seamen of mature years. 7. Out of the 7 3 shall retire every year, and shall not be replaced by members of their own family nearer than the 4th degree. 8. Each may have 300 young townsmen as defenders.
This mistake is costing Amazon Prime shoppers big. Are you still using Prime? Because at this
9. For this service they must study Freya's texts and the laws. From the sages they must learn wisdom, from the warriors the art of war, and from the sea kings the skill required for distant voyages. 10. Every year 100 of the defenders shall return to their homes, and those that may have been wounded shall remain in the citadels. 11. At the election of the defenders no burgher or grevitman, or other person of distinction, shall vote, but only the people. 12. The mother at Texland shall have 3 times 7 active messengers, and 3 times 12 speedy horses. In the other citadels each maiden shall have 3 messengers and 7 horses. 13. Every citadel shall have 50 agriculturists chosen by the people, but only those may be chosen who are not strong enough to go to war or to go to sea. 14. Every citadel must provide for its own sustenance, and must maintain its own defenses, and look after its share of the general contributions. 15. If a man is chosen to fill any office and refuses to serve, he can never become a burgher, nor have any vote. And if he is already a burgher, he shall cease to be so. 16. If any man wishes to consult the mother or a burgmaid, he must apply to the secretary, who will take him to the burgmaster. He will then be examined by a surgeon to see if he is in good health. If he is passed, he shall lay aside his arms, and 7 warriors shall present him to the mother. 17. If the affair concerns only one district, he must bring forward not less than 3 witnesses. But if it affects the whole of Friesland, he must have 21 additional witnesses, in order to guard against any deceptions. 18. Under all circumstances the mother must take care that her children, that is, Freya's people, shall remain as temperate as possible. This is her most important duty, and it is the duty of all of us to help her in performing it. 19. If she is called upon to decide any judicial question between a grevitman and the community, she must incline towards the side of the community in order to maintain peace, and because it is better that one man should suffer than many. 20. If anyone comes to the mother for advice, and she is prepared to give it, she must do it immediately. If she does not know what to advise, he must remain waiting 7 days. And if she then is unable to advise, he must go away without complaining, for it is better to have no advice at all than bad advice. 21. If a mother shall have given bad advice out of ill will, she must be killed or driven out of the land, deprived of everything. 22. If her burgh are accomplices, they are to be treated in a similar manner. 23. If her guilt is doubtful or only suspected, it must be considered and debated, if necessary, for 21 weeks. If half the votes are against her, she must be declared innocent. If 2/3 are against her, she must wait a whole year. If the votes are then the same, she must be considered guilty, but may not be put to death. 24. If any of the 1/3 who have voted for her wish to go away with her, they may depart with all their live and dead stock, and shall not be the less considered, since the majority may be wrong as well as the minority. Universal Law. 1. All freeborn men are equal, wherefore they must all have equal rights on sea and land, and on all that Wralda has given. 2. Every man may seek the wife of his choice, and every woman may bestow her hand on him whom she loves. 3. When a man takes a wife, a house and yard must be given to him. If there is none, one must be built for him. 4. If he has taken a wife in another village, and wishes to remain, they must give him a house there, and likewise the free use of the common. 5. To every man must be given a piece of land behind his house. No man shall have land in front of his house, still less an enclosure, unless he has performed some public service. In such a case it may be given, and the youngest son may inherit it, but after him it returns to the community. 6. Every village shall possess a common for the general good, and the chief of the village shall take care that it is kept in good order, so that posterity shall find it uninjured. 7. Every village shall have a marketplace. All the rest of the land shall be for tillage and forest. No one shall fell trees without the consent of the community, or without the knowledge of the forester, for the forests are general property, and no man can appropriate them. 8. The market charges shall not exceed 1/12 of the value of the goods either to natives or strangers. The portion taken for the charges shall not be sold before the other goods. 9. All the market receipts must be divided yearly into 100 parts 3 days before the jewel day. 10. The grevitman and his council shall take 20 parts, the keeper of the market 10, and his assistants 5. The folksmoter 1, the midwife 4, the village 10, and the poor and infirm shall have 50 parts. 11. There shall be no usurers in the market. If any should come, it will be the duty of the maidens to make it known through the whole land, in order that such people may not be chosen for any office, because they are hard-hearted. For the sake of money they would betray everybody, the people, the mother, their nearest relations, and even their own selves. 12. If any man should attempt to sell diseased cattle or damaged goods for sound, the market keeper shall expel him, and the maidens shall proclaim him through the country. In early times almost all the Finns lived together in their native land, which was called Aldland, and is now submerged. They were thus far away, and we had no wars. When they were driven hitherwards, and appeared as robbers, then arose the necessity of defending ourselves, and we had armies, kings, and wars. For all this there were established regulations, and out of the regulations came fixed laws. Here follow the laws which were thus established. 1. Every Frisian must resist the assailants with such weapons as he can procure, invent, and use. 2. When a boy is 12 years old he must devote 1 day in 7 to learning how to use his weapons. 3. As soon as he is perfect in the use of them they are to be given to him, and he is to be admitted as a warrior. 4. After serving as a warrior 3 years, he may become a citizen, and may have a vote in the election of the headman. 5. When he has been 7 years a voter he then may have a vote for the chief or king, and may be himself elected. 6. Every year he must be re-elected. 7. Except the king, all other officials are re-eligible who act according to Freya's laws. 8. No king may be in office more than 3 years, in order that the office may not be permanent. 9. After an interval of 7 years he may be elected again. 10. If the king is killed by the enemy, his nearest relative may be a candidate to succeed him. 11. If he dies a natural death, or if his period of service has expired, he shall not be succeeded by any blood relation nearer than the 4th degree. 12. Those who fight with arms are not men of counsel, therefore no king must bear arms. His wisdom must be his weapon, and the love of his warriors his shield. These are the rights of the mothers and the kings. 1. If war breaks out, the mother sends her messengers to the king, who sends messengers to the grevetman to call the citizens to arms. 2. The grevetmen call all the citizens together and decide how many men shall be sent. 3. All the resolutions must immediately be sent to the mother by messengers and witnesses. 4. The mother considers all the resolutions and decides upon them, and with this the king as well as the people must be satisfied. 5. When in the field, the king consults only his superior officers, but 3 citizens of the mother must be present, without any voice. These citizens must send daily reports to the mother, that they may be sure nothing is done contrary to the counsels of Freya. 6. If the king wishes to do anything which his counsel opposes, he may not persist in it. 7. If an enemy appears unexpectedly, then the king's orders must be obeyed. 8. If the king is not present, the next to him takes command, and so on in succession according to rank. 9. If there is no leader present, one must be chosen. 10. If there is no time to choose, anyone may come forward who feels himself capable of leading. 11. If a king has conquered a dangerous enemy, his successors may take his name after their own. The king may, if he wishes, choose an open piece of ground for a house and ground, the ground shall be enclosed, and may be so large that there shall be 700 steps to the boundary in all directions from the house. 12. His youngest son may inherit this, and that son's youngest son after him, then it shall return to the community. Here are the rules established for the security of all Frisians. 1. Whenever new laws are made or new regulations established, they must be for the common good, and not for individual advantage. 2. Whenever in time of war either ships or houses are destroyed, either by the enemy or as a matter of precaution, a general levy shall be assessed on the people to make it good again, so that no one may neglect the general welfare to preserve his own interest. 3. At the conclusion of a war, if any men are so severely wounded as to be unable to work, they shall be maintained at the public expense, and shall have the best seats at festivals, in order that the young may learn to honor them. 4. If there are widows and orphans, they shall likewise be maintained at the public expense, and the sons may inscribe the names of their fathers on their shields for the honor of their families. 5. If any who have been taken prisoners should return, they must be kept separate from the camp, because they may have obtained their liberty by making treacherous promises. And thus they may avoid keeping their promises without forfeiting their honor. 6. If any enemies be taken prisoners, they must be sent to the interior of the country, that they may learn our free customs. 7. If they are afterwards set free, it must be done with kindness by the maidens, in order that we may make them comrades and friends, instead of haters and enemies. From Minnow's writings. If anyone should be so wicked as to commit robbery, murder, arson, rape, or any other crime, upon a neighboring state, and our people wish to inflict punishment, the culprit shall be put to death in the presence of the offended, in order that no war may arise, and the innocent suffer for the guilty. If the offended will spare his life and forego their revenge, it may be permitted. If the culprit should be a king, brevetman, or other person in authority, we must make good his fault, but he must be punished. If he bears on his shield the honorable name of his forefathers, his kinsmen shall no longer wear it, in order that every man may look after the conduct of his relatives. Laws for the navigators.
This mistake is costing Amazon Prime shoppers big. Are you still using Prime? Because at this
Navigator is the title of those who make foreign voyages. 1. All Freya's sons have equal rights, and every stalwart youth may offer himself as a navigator to the older man, who may not refuse him as long as there is any vacancy. 2. The navigators may choose their own masters. 3. The traders must be chosen and named by the community to which they belong, and the navigators have no voice in their election. 4. If during a voyage it is found that the king is bad or incompetent, another may be put in his place, and on the return home he may make his complaint to the older man. 5. If the fleet returns with profits, the sailors may divide 1/3 among themselves in the following manner: the king 12 portions, the admiral 7, the boatswains each 2 portions, the captains 3, and the rest of the crew each 1 part. The youngest boys each 1/3 of a portion, the second boys half a portion each, and the eldest boys 2/3 of a portion each. 6. If any have been disabled, they must be maintained at the public expense, and honored in the same way as the soldiers. 7. If any have died on the voyage, their nearest relatives inherit their portion. 8. Their widows and orphans must be maintained at the public expense, and if they were killed in a sea fight, their sons may bear the names of their fathers on their shields. 9. If a topsailman is lost, his heirs shall receive a whole portion. 10. If he was betrothed, his bride may claim 7 portions in order to erect a monument to her bridegroom, but then she must remain a widow all her life. 11. If the community is fitting out a fleet, the purveyors must provide the best provisions for the voyage, and for the women and children. 12. If a sailor is worn out and poor, and has no house or patrimony, one must be given him. If he does not wish for a house, his friends may take him home, and the community must bear the expense, unless his friends decline to receive it. Useful extracts from the writings left by Minnow. Minnow was an ancient sea king. He was a seer and a philosopher, and he gave laws to the Cretans. He was born at Lindord, and after all his wanderings he had the happiness to die at Lindehem. If our neighbors have a piece of land or water which it would be advantageous for us to possess, it is proper that we should offer to buy it. If they refuse to sell it, we must let them keep it. This is Freya's text, and it would be unjust to act contrary to it. If any of our neighbors quarrel and fight about any matter except land, and they request us to arbitrate, our best course will be to decline. But if they insist upon it, it must be done honorably and justly. If anyone comes and says, "I am at war, you must help me," Or another comes and says, my son is an infant and incompetent, and I am old, so I wish you to be his guardian, and to take charge of my property until he is of age. It is proper to refuse in order that we may not come into disputes about matters foreign to our free customs. Whenever a foreign trader comes to the open markets at Weiringen and Almenland, if he cheats, he must immediately be fined, and it must be published by the maidens throughout the whole country. If he should come back, no one must deal with him. He must return as he came. Whenever traders are chosen to go to trading stations, or to sail with the fleets, they must be well known and of good reputation with the maidens. If, however, a bad man should by chance be chosen and should try to cheat, the others are bound to remove him. If he should have committed a cheat, it must be made good, and the culprit must be banished from the land in order that our name may be everywhere held in honor. If we should be ill-treated in a foreign market, whether distant or near, we must immediately attack them, for though we desire to be at peace, we must not let our neighbors underrate us or think that we are afraid. In my youth I often grumbled at the strictness of the laws, but afterwards I learned to thank Freya for her texts and our forefathers for the laws which they established upon it. W.R. Alda or Alvader has given me many years, and I have traveled over many lands and seas, and after all that I have seen, I am convinced that we alone are chosen by Alvader to have laws. Light as people can neither make laws nor obey them, they are too stupid and uncivilized. Many are like Finda. They are clever enough, but they are too rapacious, haughty, false, immoral, and bloodthirsty. The toad blows himself out, but he can only crawl. The frog cries, work, work, but he can do nothing but hop and make himself ridiculous. The raven cries, spare, spare, but he steals and wastes everything that he gets into his beak. Finda's people are just like these. They say a great deal about making good laws, and every one wishes to make regulations against misconduct, but does not wish to submit to them himself. Whoever is the most crafty crows over the others, and tries to make them submit to him, till another comes who drives him off his perch. The word Eva is too sacred for common use, therefore men have learned to say Evan. Eva means that sentiment which is implanted in the breast of every man in order that he may know what is right and what is wrong, and by which he is able to judge his own deeds and those of others. That is, if he has been well and properly brought up.
I do not do a podcast, UFC event. I don't do anything without using Alpha Brain. Most of
Eva has also another meaning, that is, tranquil, smooth, like water that is not stirred by a breath of wind. If the water is disturbed it becomes troubled, uneven, but it always has a tendency to return to its tranquil condition. That is its nature, just as the inclination towards justice and freedom exists in Freya's children. We derive this disposition from the spirit of our father W.R. Alda, which speaks strongly in Freya's children, and will eternally remain so. Eternity is another symbol of W.R. Alda, who remains always just and unchangeable. Eternal and unalterable are the signs wisdom and rectitude, which must be sought after by all pious people, and must be possessed by all judges. If, therefore, it is desired to make laws and regulations which shall be permanent, they must be equal for all men. The judges must pronounce their decisions according to these laws. If any crime is committed respecting which no law has been made, a general assembly of the people shall be called, where judgment shall be pronounced in accordance with the inspiration of W.R. Alda's spirit. If we act thus, our judgment will never fail to be right. If instead of doing right, men will commit wrong, there will arise quarrels and differences among people and states. Thence arise civil wars, and everything is thrown into confusion and destroyed, and, O foolish people! While you are injuring each other the spiteful Finda's people with their false priests come and attack your ports, ravish your daughters, corrupt your morals, and at last throw the bonds of slavery over every freeman's neck. From Minnow's writings. When Nihilenia, whose real name was Minerva, was well established, and the Crekelanders loved her as well as our own people did, there came some princes and priests to her citadel and asked Minerva, where her possessions lay. Helenia answered, I carry my possessions in my own bosom. What I have inherited is the love of wisdom, justice, and freedom. If I lose these I shall become as the least of your slaves, now I give advice for nothing, but then I should sell it. The gentlemen went away laughing and saying, Your humble servants, wise Helenia. But they missed their object, for the people took up this name as a name of honor. When they saw that their shot had missed they began to calumniate her, and to say that she had bewitched the people, but our people and the good Crekelanders understood at once that it was calumny. She was once asked, If you are not a witch, what is the use of the eggs that you always carry with you? Minerva answered, These eggs are the symbols of Freya's councils, in which our future and that of the whole human race lies concealed. Time will hatch them, and we must watch that no harm happens to them. The priest said, Well answered, but what is the use of the dog on your right hand? Helenia replied, Does not the shepherd have a sheepdog to keep his flock together? What the dog is to the shepherd I am in Freya's service. I must watch over Freya's flocks. We understand that very well, said the priests. But tell us what means the owl that always sits upon your head, is that light-shunning animal a sign of your clear vision? No, answered Helenia. He reminds me that there are people on earth who, like him, have their homes in churches and holes, who go about in the twilight, not, like him, to deliver us from mice and other plagues, but to invent tricks to steal away the knowledge of other people, in order to take advantage of them, to make slaves of them, and to suck their blood like leeches. Another time they came with a whole troop of people, when the plague was in the country, and said, "We are all making offerings to the gods that they may take away the plague. Will you not help to turn away their anger, or have you yourself brought the plague into the land with all your arts?" "No," said Minerva, "I know no gods that do evil, therefore I cannot ask them to do better. I only know one good spirit, that is Wralda's, and as he is good he never does evil." "Where, then, does evil come from?" asked the priests. "All the evil comes from you, and from the stupidity of the people who let themselves be deceived by you. If, then, your God is so exceedingly good, why does he not turn away the bad?" asked the priests. Helenia answered, "Freya has placed us here, and the carrier, that is, time, must do the rest. For all calamities there is counsel and remedy to be found, but Wralda wills that we should search it out ourselves, in order that we may become strong and wise. If we will not do that, he leaves us to our own devices, in order that we may experience the results of wise or foolish conduct." Then a prince said, "I should think it best to submit." "Very possibly," answered Helene, "he leaves us to. For all calamities there is counsel and remedy to be found, but the priests." Helenia answered, "Freya has placed us here, and the carrier, that is, time, must do the rest. For all calamities there is counsel and remedy to be found, but Wralda wills that we should search it out ourselves, in order that we may become strong and wise. That is, time, must do the rest. For all calamities there is counsel and remedy to be found, but Wralda wills that we should search it out ourselves, in order that we may become strong and wise. If we will not do that, he leaves us to our own devices, in order that we may experience the results of wise or foolish conduct." Then a prince said, "I should think it best to submit." "Very possibly," answered Helenia. "For then men would be like sheep, and you and the priests would take care of them, shearing them and leading them to the shambles. This is what our God does not desire, he desires that we should help one another, but that all should be free and wise. That is also our desire, and therefore our people choose their princes, counts, counselors, chiefs, and masters among the wisest of the good men, in order that every man shall do his best to be wise and good. Thus doing, we learn ourselves and teach the people that being wise and acting wisely can alone lead to holiness." "That seems very good judgment," said the priests. "But if you mean that the plague is caused by our stupidity, then Helenia will perhaps be so good as to bestow upon us a little of that new light of which she is so proud." "Yes," said Helenia, "but ravens and other birds of prey feed only on dead carrion, whereas the plague feeds not only on carrion but on bad laws and customs and wicked passions. If you wish the plague to depart from you and not return, you must put away your bad passions and become pure within and without." "We admit that the advice is good," said the priests, "but how shall we induce all the people under our rule to agree to it?" Then Helenia stood up and said, "The sparrows follow the sower, and the people their good princes, therefore it becomes you to begin by rendering yourselves pure, so that you may look within and without, and not be ashamed of your own conduct. Now, instead of purifying the people, you have invented foul festivals, in which they have so long reveled that they wallow like swine in the mire to atone for your evil passions." The people began to mock and to jeer, so that she did not dare to pursue the subject, and one would have thought that they would have called all the people together to drive us out of the land. But no, in place of abusing her they went all about from the heathenish Crecoland to the Alps, proclaiming that it had pleased the Almighty God to send his clever daughter Minerva, surnamed Helenia, over the sea in a cloud to give people good counsel, and that all who listened to her should become rich and happy, and in the end governors of all the kingdoms of the earth. They erected statues to her on all their altars, they announced and sold to the simple people advice that she had never given, and related miracles that she had never performed. They cunningly made themselves masters of our laws and customs, and by craft and subtlety were able to explain and spread them around. They appointed priestesses under their own care, who were apparently under the protection of Festa, our first Ihre Mutter, to watch over the holy lamp. But that lamp they lit themselves, and instead of imbuing the priestesses with wisdom, and then sending them to watch the sick and educate the young, they made them stupid and ignorant, and never allowed them to come out. They were employed as advisers, but the advice which seemed to come from them was but the repetition of the behests of the priests.
This game, you're not ready for it.
When Helenia died, we wished to choose another mother, and some of us wished to go to Texland to look for her. But the priests, who were all-powerful among their own people, would not permit it, and accused us before the people of being unholy. From the writings of Minnow. When I came away from Athenia with my followers, we arrived at an island named by my crew Creta, because of the cries that the inhabitants raised on our arrival. When they really saw that we did not come to make war, they were quiet, so that at last I was able to buy a harbor in exchange for a boat and some iron implements, and a piece of land. When we had been settled there a short time, and they discovered that we had no slaves, they were very much astonished, and when I explained to them that we had laws which made everybody equal, they wished to have the same. But they had hardly established them before the whole land was in confusion. The priests and the princes declared that we had excited their subjects to rebellion, and the people appealed to us for aid and protection. When the princes saw that they were about to lose their kingdom, they gave freedom to their people, and came to me to establish a code of laws. The people, however, got no freedom, and the princes remained masters, acting according to their own pleasure. When this storm had passed, they began to sow divisions among us. They told my people that I had invoked their assistance to make myself permanent king. Once I found poison in my food. So when a ship from Flyland sailed past, I quietly took my departure. Leaving alone, then, my own adventures, I will conclude this history by saying that we must not have anything to do with Finda's people, wherever it may be, because they are full of false tricks. Fully as much to be feared as their sweet wine with deadly poison. Here ends Minnow's writing. These are the 3 principles on which these laws are founded. 1. Everybody knows that he requires the necessaries of life, and if he cannot obtain them he does not know how to preserve his life. 2. All men have a natural desire to have children, and if it is not satisfied they are not aware what evil may spring from it. 3. Every man knows that he wishes to live free and undisturbed, and that others wish the same thing. To secure this, these laws and regulations are made. The people of Finda have also their rules and regulations, but these are not made according to what is just, only for the advantage of priests and princes, therefore their states are full of disputes and murder. 1. If any man falls into a state of destitution, his case must be brought before the count by the maidens, because a high-minded Frisian cannot bear to do that himself. 2. If any man becomes poor because he will not work, he must be sent out of the country, because the cowardly and lazy are troublesome and ill-disposed, therefore they ought to be got rid of. 3. Every young man ought to seek a bride and to be married at 25. 4. If a young man is not married at 25, he must be driven from his home, and the younger men must avoid him. If then he will not marry, he must be declared dead, and leave the country, so that he may not give offense. 5. If a man is impotent, he must openly declare that no one has anything to fear from him, then he may come or go where he likes. 6. If after that he commits any act of incontinence, then he must flee away, if he does not, he may be given over to the vengeance of those whom he has offended, and no one may aid him. 7. Anyone who commits a theft shall restore it threefold. For a second offense he shall be sent to the tin mines. The person robbed may forgive him if he pleases, but for a third offense no one shall protect him. These rules are made for angry people. 1. If a man in a passion or out of ill will breaks another's limb or puts out an eye or a tooth, he must pay whatever the injured man demands. If he cannot pay, he must suffer the same injury as he has done to the other. If he refuses this, he must appeal to the Burgmagd in order to be sent to work in the iron or tin mines until he has expiated his crime under the general law. 2. If a man is so wicked as to kill a Frisian, he must forfeit his own life. But if the Burgmagd can send him to the tin mines for his life before he is taken, she may do so. 3. If the prisoner can prove by proper witnesses that the death was accidental, he may go free. But if it happens a second time, he must go to the tin mines, in order to avoid any unseemly hatred or vengeance. These are the rules concerning bastards. 1. If any man sets fire to another's house, he is no Frisian, he is a bastard. If he is caught in the act, he must be thrown into the fire, and wherever he may flee, he shall never be secure from the avenging justice. 2. No true Frisian shall speak ill of the faults of his neighbors. If any man injures himself, but does no harm to others, he must be his own judge, but if he becomes so bad that he is dangerous to others, they must bring it before the count. But if instead of going to the count a man accuses another behind his back, he must be put on the pillory in the marketplace, and then sent out of the country, but not to the tin mines, because even there a backbiter is to be feared. 3. If any man should prove a traitor and show to our enemies the paths leading to our places of refuge, or creep into them by night, he must be the offspring of Finda, he must be burnt. The sailors must take his mother and all his relations to a desolate island, and there scatter his ashes, in order that no poisonous herbs may spring from them.
This is pretty much the closest thing to artificial intelligence in trading. This robot beats almost.
The maidens must curse his name in all the states, in order that no child may be called by his name, and that his ancestors may repudiate him. War had come to an end, but famine came in its place. There were 3 men who each stole a sack of corn from different owners, but they were all caught. The first owner brought his thief to the judge, and the maiden said everywhere that he had done right. The second owner took the corn away from his thief and let him go in peace. The maiden said he has done well. The third owner went to the thief's house, and when he saw what misery was there, he went and brought a wagon load of necessaries to relieve their distress. Freya's maidens came around him and wrote his deed in the eternal book, and wiped out all his sins. This was reported to the Oera mutter, and she had it made known over the whole country. What is written hereunder is inscribed on the walls of Oera. See plate I. What appears at the top is the signs of the jewel, that is, the first symbol of Wralda, also of the origin or beginning from which time is derived. This is the croter, which must always go round with the jewel. According to this model Freya formed the set hand which she used to write her texts. When Fasta was Oera mutter she made a running hand out of it. The Witkening, that is, the Sea King Godfried the Old, made separate numbers for the set hand and for the runic hand. It is therefore not too much that we celebrate it once a year. We may be eternally thankful to Wralda that he allowed his spirit to exercise such an influence over our forefathers. In her time Finda also invented a mode of writing, but that was so high-flown and full of flourishes that her descendants have soon lost the meaning of it. Afterwards they learned our writing, that is, the Finns, the Thyriers, and the Krekelanders, but they did not know that it was taken from the jewel, and most therefore always be written round like the sun. Furthermore, they wished that their writing should be illegible by other people, because they always had matters to conceal. In doing this they acted very unwisely, because their children could only with great difficulty read the writings of their predecessors, whereas our most ancient writings are as easy to read as those that were written yesterday. Here is a specimen of the set hand and of the running hand, as well as of the figures, in both. See plate 2. This stands inscribed upon all citadels. Before the bad time came our country was the most beautiful in the world. The sun rose higher, and there was seldom frost. The trees and shrubs produced various fruits, which are now lost. In the fields we had not only barley, oats, and rye, but wheat which shone like gold, and which could be baked in the sun's rays. The years were not counted, for one was as happy as another. On one side we were bounded by Wralda Sea, on which no one but us might or could sail. On the other side we were hedged in by the broad Twiskland, Tuschenland, Dutchland, through which the Finda people dared not come on account of the thick forests and the wild beasts. Eastward our boundary went to the extremity of the East Sea, and westward to the Mediterranean Sea. So that besides the small rivers we had 12 large rivers given us by Wralda to keep our land moist, and to show our seafaring men the way to his sea. The banks of these rivers were at one time entirely inhabited by our people, as well as the banks of the Rhine from one end to the other. Opposite Denmark and Jutland we had colonies and a Bergmagd. Thence we obtained copper and iron, as well as tar and pitch, and some other necessaries. Opposite to us we had Britain, formerly Westland, with her tin mines. Britain was the land of the exiles, who with the help of their Bergmagd had gone away to save their lives. But in order that they might not come back they were tattooed with AB on the forehead, the banished with a red dye, the other criminals with blue. Moreover, our sailors and merchants had many factories among the distant Krekelanders and in Lydia. In Lydia, Libya, the people are black. As our country was so great and extensive, we had many different names. Those who were settled to the east of Denmark were called Jutland, because often they did nothing else than look for amber, Jutland, on the shore. Those who lived in the islands were called Let-ten, because they lived an isolated life. All those who lived between Denmark and the Sandval, now the Skelt, were called Sturleden, pilots, zeekampers, naval men, and Angelaren, fishermen. The Angelaren were men who fished in the sea, and were so named because they used lines and hooks instead of nets. From there to the nearest part of Krekeland the inhabitants were called Katamers, because they never went to sea but remained ashore. Those who were settled in the higher marches bounded by Twisklanden, Germany, were called Saxmannen, because they were always armed against the wild beasts and the savage Britons. Besides these we had the names Landzaten, natives of the land, Marzaten, natives of the fens, and Wood or Houtzaten, natives of the woods. How the bad time came. During the whole summer the sun had been hid behind the clouds, as if unwilling to look upon the earth. There was perpetual calm, and a damp mist hung like a wet sail over the houses and the marshes. The air was heavy and oppressive, and in men's hearts was neither joy nor cheerfulness. In the midst of this stillness the earth began to tremble as if she was dying. The mountains opened to vomit forth fire and flames. Some sank into the bosom of the earth, and in other places mountains rose out of the plain. Aldland, called by the seafaring people, Atland, disappeared, and the wild waves rose so high over hill and dale that everything was buried in the sea. Many people were swallowed up by the earth, and others who had escaped the fire perished in the water. It was not only in Finda's land that the earth vomited fire, but also in Twiskland, Germany. Whole forests were burned one after the other, and when the wind blew from that quarter our land was covered with ashes. Rivers changed their course, and at their mouths new islands were formed of sand and drift. During 3 years this continued, but at length it ceased, and forests became visible. Many countries were submerged, and in other places land rose above the sea, and the wood was destroyed through the half of Twiskland, Germany. Troops of Finda's people came and settled in the empty places. Our dispersed people were exterminated or made slaves. Then watchfulness was doubly impressed upon us, and time taught us that union is force. This is inscribed on the Warburg by the Aldegamute. The Warburg is not a maiden city, but the place where all the foreign articles brought by sailors were stored. It lies 3 hours south from Mediasblick. Thus is the preface. Hills, bow your heads, weep, ye streams and clouds. Yes. Skunland, Scandinavia, blushes, an enslaved people tramples on your garment, O Freya. This is the history. 101 years after the submersion of Aldland a people came out of the east. That people was driven by another. Behind us, in Twiskland, Germany, they fell into disputes, divided into 2 parties, and each went its own way. Of the one no account has come to us, but the other came in the back of our Skunland, which was thinly inhabited, particularly the upper part. Therefore they were able to take possession of it without contest, and as they did no other harm, we would not make war about it. Now that we have learned to know them, we will describe their customs, and after that how matters went between us. They were not wild people, like most of Finda's race, but, like the Egyptians, they have priests and also statues in their churches. The priests are the only rulers, they call themselves Magyars, and their headman Magi. He is high priest and king in one. The rest of the people are of no account, and in subjection to them. This people have not even a name. But we call them Finns, because although all the festivals are melancholy and bloody, they are so formal that we are inferior to them in that respect. But still they are not to be envied, because they are slaves to their priests, and still more to their creeds. They believe that evil spirits abound everywhere, and enter into men and beasts, but of Wralda's spirit they know nothing. They have weapons of stone, the Magyars of copper. The Magyars affirm that they can exorcise and recall the evil spirits, and this frightens the people, so that you never see a cheerful face.
What they're doing here is magic. I don't think you can put a price on somebody's smile. And for Scotty, the biggest thing that he had that really pulled him down.
When they were well established, the Magyars sought our friendship, they praised our language and customs, our cattle and iron weapons, which they would willingly have exchanged for their gold and silver ornaments. And they always kept their people within their own boundaries, and that outwitted our watchfulness. 80 years afterwards, just at the time of the Jul feast, they overran our country like a snowstorm driven by the wind. All who could not flee away were killed. Freya was appealed to, but the Skunlanders, Scandinavians, had neglected her advice. Then all the forces were assembled, and 3 hours from Godesberg they were withstood, but war continued. Kat or Katrine was the name of the priestess who was Bergmagd of Godesberg. Kat was proud and haughty, and would neither seek counsel nor aid from the mother, but when the Bergthiren, citizens, knew this, they themselves sent messengers to Texland to the Iramutter. Minna, this was the name of the mother, summoned all the sailors and the young men from Oestflyland and Denmark. From this expedition the history of Woden sprang, which is inscribed on the citadels, and is here copied. At Aldergamud there lived an old sea king whose name was Sterik, and whose deeds were famous. This old fellow had 3 nephews. Woden, the eldest, lived at Lunkamakia, near the Emud, in Oestflyland, with his parents. He had once commanded troops. Tunis and Inca were naval warriors, and were just then staying with their father at Aldergamud. When the young warriors had assembled together, they chose Woden to be their leader or king, and the naval force chose Tunis for their sea king and Inca for their admiral. The navy then sailed to Denmark, where they took on board Woden and his valiant host. The wind was fair, so they arrived immediately in Skunland. When the northern brothers met together, Woden divided his powerful army into 3 bodies. Freya was their war cry, and they drove back the Finns and Magyars like children. When the Magi heard how his forces had been utterly defeated, he sent messengers with truncheon and crown, who said to Woden, O almighty king, we are guilty, but all that we have done was done from necessity. You think that we attacked your brothers out of ill will, but we were driven out by our enemies, who are still at our heels. We have often asked your Bergmagd for help, but she took no notice of us. The Magi says that if we kill half our numbers in fighting with each other, then the wild shepherds will come and kill all the rest. The Magi possesses great riches, but he has seen that Freya is much more powerful than all our spirits together. He will lay down his head in her lap. You are the most warlike king on the earth, and your people are of iron. Become our king, and we will all be your slaves. What glory it would be for you if you could drive back the savages. Our trumpets would resound with your praises, and the fame of your deeds would precede you everywhere. Woden was strong, fierce, and warlike, but he was not clear-sighted, therefore he was taken in their toils, and crowned by the Magi. Very many of the sailors and soldiers to whom this proceeding was displeasing went away secretly, taking Kat with them. But Kat, who did not wish to appear before either the mother or the General Assembly, jumped overboard. Then a storm arose and drove the ships upon the banks of Denmark, with the total destruction of their crews. This strait was afterwards called the Kattegat. When Woden was crowned, he attacked the savages, who were all horsemen, and fell upon Woden's troops like a hailstorm, but like a whirlwind they were turned back, and did not dare to appear again. When Woden returned, Magi gave him his daughter to wife. Whereupon he was incensed with herbs. But they were magic herbs, and by degrees he became so audacious that he dared to disavow and ridicule the spirits of Freya and Wralda, while he bent his free head before the false and deceitful images. His reign lasted 7 years, and then he disappeared. The Magi said that he was taken up by their gods and still reigned over us, but our people laughed at what they said. When Woden had disappeared some time, disputes arose. We wished to choose another king, but the Magi would not permit it. He asserted that it was his right given him by his idols. But besides this dispute there was one between the Magyars and Finns, who would honor neither Freya nor Woden. But the Magi did just as he pleased, because his daughter had a son by Woden, and he would have it that this son was of high descent. While all were disputing and quarreling, he crowned the boy as king, and set up himself as guardian and counselor. Those who cared more for themselves than for justice let him work his own way, but the good men took their departure. Many Magyars fled back with their troops, and the sea people took ship, accompanied by a body of stalwart Finns as rowers. Next comes upon the stage the history of Neef Tunis and Neef Inca. All this is inscribed not only on the Warburg, but also on the Berg Stavia, which lies behind the port of Stavra. When Tunis wished to return home, he went first towards Denmark. But he might not land there, for so the mother had ordered, nor was he to land at Flyland nor anywhere about there. In this way he would have lost all his people by want and hardship, so he landed at night to steal and sailed on by day. Thus coasting along, he at length arrived at the colony of Kadik, Cadiz, so called because it was built with a stone quay. Here they bought all kinds of stores, but Tuncha the Bergmagd would not allow them to settle there. When they were ready they began to disagree. Tunis wished to sail through the straits to the Mediterranean Sea, and enter the service of the rich Egyptian king, as he had done before, but Inca said he had had enough of all those Findas people. Inca thought that perchance some high-lying part of Atland might remain as an island, where he and his people might live in peace. As the two cousins could not agree, Tunis planted a red flag on the shore, and Inca a blue flag. Every man could choose which he pleased, and to their astonishment the greater part of the Finns and Magyars followed Inca, who had objected to serve the kings of Finda's people. When they had counted the people and divided the ships accordingly, the fleet separated. We shall hear of Tunis afterwards, but nothing more of Inca. Neef Tunis coasted through the straits to the Mediterranean Sea. When Atland was submerged there was much suffering also on the shores of the Mediterranean, on which account many of Finda's people, Krekelanders, and people from Lyda's land, came to us. On the other hand, many of our people went to Lyda's land. The result of all this
Alrighty then. Just wanted to get this book on the record, let everyone know that there's a full audiobook out there. I might stream a little poker later. A little bit, I'm not sure. Probably. Alright, y'all. Peace.
No, 6. They're showing 6.